Recording in progress.
Test, that works. So let me restart. Good evening. This is a meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. I'm Lyle Baker, the chair, and we're joined at the start of the meeting by several members of the committee. To my left, Councilor Pam Wright, Councilor Susan Albright, Councilor Rena Getz, Councilor David Kalis. I believe Councilor Oliver is here, and here he is. And we've also been joined as not a member of the committee, but always welcome, is Councilor Leary. We've also been joined by members of the Planning and Development Board, and Mr. McCormick is the chair. Do you want to introduce your team on both here and online?
This is Kevin McCormick, chair of the Planning and Development Board. I'm here with Ed Daly, and on Zoom is Lee Breckenridge and Peter Doringer.
Thank you very much. And we've also been joined by members of the planning staff who will talk with us a little later. But the first thing we're going to do is to introduce on two items for public hearing. I'm going to read them both into the record, but take them in the order in which, or actually three items, and then we will take them in the order in which they receive for public testimony. But the planning department normally gives us a briefing on each one at the beginning. Are you going to do any of that tonight? I thought so. So, but just for the purposes of information, they are item 31124, requesting discussion and possible amendments to dormer regulations in Chapter 30 of zoning. Then 31724, requesting discussion and possible amendments to retaining wall regulations in Chapter 30 zoning. And finally, number 38524, requesting amendment to Section 9.1 of Chapter 30 with zoning. And this relates to village overlay districts. And then we have a couple of appointments and then a conversation with the planning department about the whole issue of how to deal with teardowns and the like. So I would begin the discussion by asking the planning department to just give us a briefing first on 31124 relating to dormers. Are you prepared? And please introduce yourself on the mic so that the public can hear you as well.
Thank you very much. My name is Nora Massler, and I'm a planning associate on the long-range planning team. We'll share my screen with a brief presentation. All right. So as Councilor Baker mentioned, we are discussing 31124, amendments to dormer regulations. What is a dormer? It's typically a window that projects out from a sloping roof. I'm sure many of us are familiar. And in Newton, a dormer may be no wider than 50% of the length of the exterior wall of the story next below. And where more than one dormer is located on the same side of the roof, the width of all dormers combined may not exceed 50% of the length of the exterior wall below. There is no intent to change the meaning behind this regulation. The catalyst of this change is the interpretation of this regulation. It came to the attention of staff that the length of the exterior wall below was interpreted by ISD as being a separate wall each time there was a jog or change in the plane of the wall created by something like a bay window. And given that those type of architectural articulation is something that we'd like to incentivize rather than disincentivize, we're proposing a change. Here you can see an image of something that currently would not be allowed because of that jog that you can see in the wall below under this dormer. So this dormer would be considered too wide, even though it is 50% of the roof plane. Dormers are also limited by the definition of half-story in section 154C, which defines a half-story as a story directly under a sloping roof where the area with a ceiling height of 7 feet or greater is less than 2/3 of the area next below. So we don't believe any change in the dormer regulation will lead to a significant increase in the size of dormers. The proposed change is to alter the language to say the widest length of the uninterrupted roof plane excluding overhangs. And here you can see that language in the redlined document, which was also included in the memo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone here who wishes to testify on this item? Anybody online? I'm missing Mr. Walter, I believe, is one hand is raised from the public.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Jay Walter, 83 Pembroke Street. I'm a member of a group of the professional builders and architects and developers. We've studied this amendment, and we think it's a good idea. It adds clarity to the zoning code, and I think it'll make it much easier for the ISD to interpret, and easier for builders and users of the code. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to be heard? In the committee and not on the committee, in the public? If not, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing on this item. Councilor Kalis moves close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the planning board?
Could I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
All in favor of closing the public hearing? 4-4. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Thank you. So I think it's appropriate to just discuss this in committee and see where we are on this item. Is there any discussion on this item? Members, Councilor Albright and then Councilor Oliver.
I'll just say that the change...
Can you use the mic? I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
I forgot. The change reflects what the original intent of the dormer ordinance was. I was not on the committee at the time, but participated in the conversation, and it's a good thing. And I would, if you want to pass it tonight, I would like to move approval.
Okay, I will entertain that motion when we finish conversation, but thank you. Councilor Oliver.
Great, thank you, sir. Just a quick question. I asked this question just for clarification when this was in committee. But what do we mean by uninterrupted roof plane? Because it's a word that's added in there for importance or emphasis, perhaps, but I just wanted clarification on that, please.
The planning department offer.
Thank you for the question. We worked very closely with ISD going through various examples. An interruption in the roof plane would be a change in pitch or anything that could be considered a clear visual break or change in plane in the roof. So for example, if you had an addition that was at a different angle to the existing roof, that would be an interruption in roof plane, and you'd be measuring from that point forward. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does.
Okay.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you. I just wanted to note for the record, we've been joined online by Councilor Danberg, I believe. Councilor Getz?
Thank you, Chair. And I don't know if I need to ask this question through you to the planning department or just directly.
You can ask it directly.
All right.
You don't have to go through me.
I'm just looking at the planning department memo on page 3 where it depicts the actual dormer as an interpretation of the longest wall segment, but it isn't measured. There's no linear feet of that dormer. You know, so I'm assuming that it is in fact 50% of the longest wall segment, number 1. Is that correct?
And the planning department respond. This is in reference to a memo that is part of our packet for those of you who are watching online. department is prepared to inform us about the nature of this particular amendment.
Thank you. Just a moment. We're pulling up the memo. On page 3, this was simply an example of what currently would not be allowed. We didn't fully investigate whether this particular example would be allowed under the change. I believe it's roughly 50%, but this won't be included in the ordinance.
Okay, I just wanted to be able to interpret the drawing correctly, you know, in the sense of understanding that in fact that dormer that's depicted there is in fact 50% or less of the, you know, the roof plane.
My understanding is the department, correct me if I'm wrong, is trying to illustrate a general matter, but this is not drawn to scale in a sense of having been measured. But I think the thrust of the amendment is to make sure that dormers are no more than 50% of the uninterrupted plane,
Right.
which is our intent. I think originally when we passed this, the problem of the broken plane has obviously made it difficult for some people to do this.
Okay.
Anyone else? And we have, I believe, Councilor Albright. Let me come back to you.
So I would move approval.
Okay, Councilor Albright has moved approval in committee. Any further discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. We're missing Councilor Christman, so I think that's a 7-0. Is that correct? We got? Yeah. So 7-0 in favor. Planning Board, do you wish to vote?
Yes, if there is any discussion, otherwise, could I have a motion, please?
I move approval of the proposed zoning amendment.
All in favor, please raise a hand.
Aye.
That's 4-0.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next item is the possible Amendment 31724. This relates to retaining wall regulations. So again, the Planning Department, you want to present this item to us?
Yes, thank you very much. Previously, only retaining walls over 4 feet within the setback required a special permit, while retaining walls outside of the setback had not required a special permit. The special permit requirement for retaining walls over 4 feet in height in all zoning districts for all building types was voted for in April of 2024. I'm sure we all remember. The Village Center Overlay District adopted last December contains a similar provision. The intent of the special permit requirement was to address concerns particularly for single and two-family construction, which were using retaining walls to create basements that do not count towards the number of stories or the floor area ratio. They were also using retaining walls to raise basements above high groundwater tables or to significantly alter grade to create a flatter site. However, this change had the unintended consequence of limiting the by right ability to access underground parking in multifamily and mixed-use buildings. This was flagged internally by staff shortly after the change, and then it was also noted by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities in the letter of notice informing the city of conditional compliance with the MBTA Communities Law. Here you can see their language expressed in that letter. Ultimately, they expressed the need for the city to change the retaining wall special permit to be compliant with the MBTA Communities Law. Though the state would prefer a broader exemption for retaining walls, the following would be acceptable, which limits the exemption to the Village Center Overlay District. Here's the redlined language that was also in the memo for this meeting, but ultimately this exemption is limited to retaining walls in the Village Center Overlay District that are enabling access to parking or loading facilities. Additional safeguards against excessive retaining wall heights include the revised height definition and the Village Center Overlay District's exemption from floor area requirements, which disincentivizes the excessive use of retaining walls to increase floor area. Here are some examples. You can see this mixed use, or this multifamily building, which used a retaining wall greater than 4 feet to access underground parking on Washington. Here's another example of multifamily, again using the retaining wall to access underground parking on Cherry Street. Here's another example of multifamily on Needham Street using that retaining wall for underground parking. And here are a few commercial examples at Trio, as well as the complex, which includes Wegmans and Equinox, accessing the loading zone. And the next step would be to vote on the proposed language. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wishing to be heard from the public on this item? We'll have a discussion in the committee in a minute. I see one hand, again, Mr. Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, we on the pros have studied this proposed amendment, and we support it. It will allow us to maintain our strengthened retaining wall ordinance while allowing an exemption for underground parking, which is a positive thing for multifamily and a necessary thing. So we support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? If not, I'm going to entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion from Councilor Oliver to close the public hearing. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it. Mr. McCormick?
A motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
4-0.
Thank you very much. Okay, in committee, conversation. Councilor Wright.
So I support the retaining walls for underground parking, but there's another section in there that says for loading docks or for parking in general that you could have above ground retaining walls. And this could by right, could be 20 feet. I provided with the clerk, I wanted to show 2 slides. If she could show that. About some parking that could be worse than what it is right now. Right there.
It's not the sheep. I just want to point out.
So this right here is not in the village center, but if it was, if they were having parking in the back of the lot, they could put up a 20-foot retaining wall by right so that they could provide parking on the back side of that lot. And the next one, which is on Brayland by Newton Center here, again, if they designed this house with parking in the back, and there's another one a couple of lots down on Chase Street doing the same thing, and the lot slopes down towards the T-tracks, they can build by right a very large retaining wall to allow parking in the back. So I have, like I said, I have no problems for underground parking, but we're going to see a lot more of this. And also, I'm thinking of Dunstan East in West Newton Square. That lot slopes way down to Cheesecake Brook. And if they were pulling their permit, you know, with these changes, they could make that lot flat if they had their parking or their loading block in the back of the buildings. And we would have very tall retaining walls that we'd be staring at. And so I say no on that. Yes on the underground parking, I have no problems with that, but I think more than 4 feet, then it needs to be by special permit. Thank you.
Other members of the committee? Counselor Getz, and then Counselor Albright.
I appreciate the work that was done on this by the planning department.
Just a little closer to the mic.
Okay, I appreciate the work that was done on this by the planning department, but I have a couple of questions here. In terms of the ordinance language change, it specifically says in B, walls or a combination of walls may exceed 4 feet without a special permit when the walls are enabled for access to parking and loading facilities. So that's anywhere on the lot, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then for the language in A, it goes on, the new language says, when a combination of retaining walls are within 25 feet of each other, measured from the front face of the wall to the front face of a wall, height is measured from the foot of the lowest part of the wall to the top of the highest wall. So 25 feet, in terms of looking at the building footprints that are being proposed, how realistic is this in terms of capturing I'm interpreting the maximum building footprints for MRT is 1,500, VC2 is 10,000, and VC3 is 15,000. So in terms of creating a retaining wall that is within 25 feet for a building with a footprint of that size, how many buildings would actually be captured?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So this is the same language. This is just mirroring the language that was adopted recently in Section 5. I'm not sure what exactly you're asking as far as how many buildings will be captured.
When I say buildings captured, I'm talking about the actualization of a building footprint, in terms of a footprint that is less than 25 feet on one, edge to edge. So that's a pretty small building.
That wouldn't be a retaining wall, though.
No, the building itself, in
Okay.
order to be built, would have a retaining wall on each side of the building. Do you understand what I'm saying? Retaining wall, building footprint. So you're saying it has to be within 25 feet in order to be excluded, right?
So, no, so we're saying if you can't get around the 4 foot by doing a series of smaller walls, if those smaller walls are within 25 feet of each other. So if you have two 2-foot walls within 25 feet, that counts as a 4-foot wall. We're not meaning to capture walls that are on either side of the building. It's meant to capture terraced walls.
Okay, so I have a problem with this because it doesn't seem as if it's going to be capable of then not permitting buildings that are being built up on a lot. Do you understand what I'm saying?
So just like anywhere else, you could go up to 4 feet around the perimeter, the same as anywhere else in the city. I do want to caution that what we're proposing, I think, is about as restrictive as we can go and obtain compliance. The state wasn't thrilled. We expect to get a warning that this is something they'll be watching to see if it prevents development by right. So I really would caution against trying to further restrict the language.
Okay. And then lastly, I'm in support of an earth-moving ordinance because I'm really trying to capture the amount of change, topographical change on a lot that's permitted. So I sort of see this as hand in hand, in terms of trying to minimize and the direction that we're going in terms of stormwater control. But I also would suggest that the VCOD was, we used the compliance tool, and all the parking was considered surface parking, and we reached compliance with surface parking, calculated into that compliance tool. So I'm very concerned that this is a second bite at them sort of restricting what we're able to do in terms of our actual lots.
I understand. We have no authority over how the state reviews this. We were surprised at the level of review, but they are looking to make sure that things truly are by right and that reasonable development could happen. I believe they did have language in the regulations around that and not using other regulations to, essentially make things special permit. So that's what they were really looking for, was anything else that could likely trigger a special permit.
Okay, but do you understand my point of?
I completely
okay.
understand. We just have nothing we can do about it.
Okay, all right, but I am saying that we have reached compliance, you know, in terms of using their compliance tool, and so we are in compliance, but now they're suggesting that we are not, because we're restricting development on the lots, you know, and I don't see that as such.
There were other things to the review. It wasn't purely the compliance tool. You needed that to show lot unit capacity, but that was not the only requirement to reach compliance. So we were, again, surprised by the level of review and how in-depth they went, but this is where we're at. We're in conditional compliance until we address these items.
Thank you.
Let me go back to Councilor Wright, and, excuse me, Councilor Albright hadn't been heard yet. Let me.
Thank you. Question before I say anything more. Did you try to add the word underground before the word parking? And what was the result if you did?
So, yes, the problem there is that to truly define underground is difficult. Even some of the examples we showed, some of the parking is truly fully underground, some isn't. If there is some grade change on the lot, it is typical that some is partially above ground, some is partially below ground. It would be really difficult to require that all parking be fully underground.
So it's parking beneath the building, is that the issue? I mean, it's not, it allows parking beneath the building, which may or may not be underground.
Right, and the defining of underground was the part that was problematic, because the walls are necessary when you're trying to get, mostly where we see the walls is when you're trying to get down to the garage, right? But that doesn't mean all of the parking is underground across the entirety of the building.
So you're worried about it excluding parking that's not underground?
We're worried that it's pretty rare that you have a building where all of the parking is fully, completely underground. Some portion is often at or above grade.
Okay, and you can't add the words beneath the building, where there's parking beneath the building?
Like I said, we're already walking a fine line. We're fairly confident this language, like I said, will pass the state, even though they want the retaining wall special permit removed entirely, because they want to make sure that you can develop the site, even if that requires retaining walls. You know, we pointed out that you can still go up to 4 feet at other areas on the site, and that we are most concerned about allowing for the parking. As I said, we expect some sort of warning that this will be something that they'll continue to monitor. So I really don't think we can push it.
So when you do site plan review, you do site plan review of these, is that right?
We do site plan review when the lot's over 15,000, or the planning board does site plan review when the lot's over 15,000 square feet.
So if and the two egregious examples that Councilor Wright showed us, are if they're justifying building a 25-foot wall because of parking, that seems to me a fake, a false reason. Yeah. And I was wondering if the planning board could say, no, that makes no sense. You don't need a 25-foot wall to allow parking.
Yeah, that would be fully within their purview. I also don't expect the Commissioner of Inspectional Services, because we've had a lot of discussions on this with him, to say that you have to make the lot, you need a 25-foot wall in order to have a couple of surface parking spaces.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is those are egregious examples, but I think that they can be prevented from happening by site plan review, by the planning board, or whoever's doing it. And I think we need to move this forward to become in compliance. And so I would be in favor of approving it and watching it very carefully to see what happens. And I mean watching it very carefully and giving us a report on anything that violates the principle that we're trying to achieve.
Okay, thank you. I want to come back and continue the discussion. I think Councilor Oliver, you want to be heard on this?
Thank you, Chair. So in the conversation you had with EOHLC, with, the initial language, just the conversation you had with them, did you point out that, like, for example, did you talk about the two examples that Councilor Wright brought up as, because I believe one of them is within a VCOD, right? The other is not. Clearly, it's over in Newton Corner. But I'm curious because I hear what you're saying. I think that the intent here is, more or less reasonable, but so is ours. And if we haven't shown the state examples of things that this could allow, I think we should. And, in perhaps I'm willing to personally take on a little bit more risk there than anybody else in the room, but I'm actually a little bit hesitant to allow this to be kind of bucked over to, site plan review or even ISD, given the last item we just saw. Like, there are kind of interpretations here that I don't think we should be relying on, when it does seem to me that there is a way to have a conversation with the state to be able to restrict what it is we're looking at to mutual benefit, to the mutual benefit of the city in preventing the Brayland property, as well as I think it was Washington Street and Playstead, which is where those photos were taken from. It does seem to me like this is a conversation worth having. And I guess I'll go all the way back to the beginning of my statement there. Did they see the photos of those two properties?
We have shared examples, and we have explained that this has been an item that has been really important in the city recently and has had a lot of attention, which is why they were willing to likely allow us to do the language we proposed, with the caveat that they'll keep an eye on it, because they were looking for us to remove the special permit requirement entirely. So we did share examples. We did explain, some of the things we've been seeing. I'm less worried because we have changed the way height is measured since these examples. There is much less incentive. There's actually quite a bit of disincentive to regrade significantly like that. But we did share that.
But so I just want to be really clear. You shared photos of the Brayland property and the property on, I think it was Washington Street.
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Okay, so they saw those photos and the reaction to those were, meh, don't worry about it.
The reaction was that their goal is to allow housing to be built by right, and they want to ensure that something like a retaining wall isn't preventing that.
Oh, thank you.
So, Councilor Danberg and, Councilor Kalis, I'll come to you. Councilor Danberg, I think your hand was raised. I want to be heard on this item myself, and I'll wait on the
Yes,
committee.
thank you very much. And thank you to Councilor Wright for, again, bringing these photos. We've seen both of these photos more than once, and they are examples of egregious wall building. In the case of the Brayland property, that unfortunate look and building of that wall was created by what I view as a loophole in our zoning code that says that when you build a two-family home, you may not step down the second unit. The the roof lines have to be the same on both units. And in this case, when you have an extreme difference of topography, in this case, I think that the Chase Street unit is 15 feet higher than the topography on the Breland side, because the Breland Street is about 15 feet lower than Chase. And what this did, in not allowing the building to be stepped down, the second unit to be stepped down, was create the necessity to have this very high retaining wall that the developer knows is actually going to make that unit much harder to sell. So if we were to allow, in the case of topography that either goes up or goes down, I think that would have, we would never have had that look. I have had an initial discussion with the planning department, although we haven't been able to move on it because we've got so much else on our plate right now. But if we can change the regulation to allow, in the case of a change in topography, an extreme change in topography, for the second unit to be lowered, then we would not have to have this happen again. But if we don't make that change, we could face another example like Breland Street. So while there aren't too many streets that have this kind of two parallel streets that have this kind of a hill slope, if another house on Chase Street, on Breland rather, were to decide to rebuild, this could happen again. Because I do understand that the state really wants to make sure that there are not excuses that and blocks that municipalities would put to force a developer to go to special permit. So I think we do need to make sure that neither of these cases happen again. But the Newton zoning law was a problem in the case of the Breland property.
Thank you, Councilor. I have just a question that I want to pose, and then I go to colleagues. I would just ask the department if the term underground was put in front of parking. It doesn't say that all of the parking has to be underground. It just says that access to underground parking. I'm curious why that wouldn't be responsive to the concern that Councilor Wright has indicated, but without causing you to require all of the parking to be underground.
So we did consider this. It still raised concerns with the state. And, you know, we talked about potential interpretations from ISD. This is something I can see in the future being interpreted as, you know, being fully underground. So we did spend quite a bit of time on this, trying to craft as tight of a regulation as we could, working with ISD and working with the state. This was where we landed. I do think we have enough checks in place for other things, like MRT lots are the ones that are the only ones that are likely to have some slope that you're dealing with, because the other lots are in our commercial cores where you typically have pretty flat lots already. In MRT, you can only build a 1,500 square foot footprint. So you're not going to develop a property like Breland Chase with just one MRT building. You're going to either do multiple buildings through site plan review, or you're going to split the lot and do 2 buildings. The way we are measuring height now would make it near impossible to do that sort of grading and retaining wall. So I think we do have several other checks in place that will ensure the retaining walls do not get excessive.
Thank you. I want to discuss that a little further, but I want to hear from my colleagues who haven't spoken yet. Councilor Kalis?
I guess, Ms. Kyra, the only thing I was wondering is with Brayland and Washington Street, are there any other similarities between those two that we can find that where we're able to kind of qualify that properties like these, we won't allow a retaining wall over 4 feet? Like,
So,
Sorry, couldn't hear the last sentence. It just
where we
went-
won't allow a retaining wall over 4 feet.
so these are very different properties from the VCOD. They are both single or two-family, so automatically couldn't be built in the VCOD because it's 3 units and up only. The one at Washington, the retaining wall was created by the property owner that was up higher. So the view that you're seeing is the, adjacent owner who was most impacted by the wall. But the upper property owner was trying to flatten out their site, I think for a pool. That's not what you're going to see in the VCOD. Again, these are smaller lots. These are going to be, more built out because that's the nature of it. The Chase and Brayland, again, I think Councilor Danberg described it well. It's partially a result of our zoning that doesn't allow for the 2 units to adapt to the topography. This is something that's been a problem for a long time. We did propose an amendment last term. I don't think there was a lot of interest in it at the time, but it is something we can revisit. And at the time, we had the rules that were measuring height based off of the proposed grade. So the final grade, not the existing, which is what will be in place starting in January. So I think these are outliers. These are partially why we put these rules in place, but I do not believe they apply to what we're likely to see in the VCOD. And this is why we limited this proposal. If you remember, we initially were proposing to exempt all multifamily. Understood the concerns raised by the committee that was too broad. So this is focused just on VCOD. So it wouldn't apply to single and two-family homes anywhere in the city.
Oh. So if we do require the special permit for a retaining wall of 4 feet, the state could, what?
We wouldn't be in compliance. So I don't know. We would not be eligible for grant funding. Whether that means a lawsuit like Milton, I don't know. But we definitely wouldn't be eligible for grant funding. We're eligible while we're in conditional compliance.
Right. And you feel confident, I mean, Councilor Albright was saying, in which I am kind of agreeing with, that we monitor this to see how
Absolutely.
how it goes.
Absolutely.
Have we seen other houses or other places within the city where this has happened, or we just have those 2 examples?
I think those are the most egregious. I mean, we did put in place this special permit for all retaining walls over 4 feet in the rest of the city. So we're just talking about VCOD right now. And we are monitoring that closely. We're, closely watching. We only have a couple
So it's within the VCOD. So
this proposal is only for within the VCOD.
okay, so that I feel confident you'd be able to monitor. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and we are monitoring that closely already.
Thank you.
Let me go back to Councilor Wright in a moment, but Mr. McCormick had his hand up, and I wanted to comment.
I assume board members can jump in at any time to this discussion.
Say again?
I assume board members can jump in at any time to this discussion.
Yeah, yes.
I just wanted to, we had a lot of discussion at our meeting about this, and I think we resolved everything, but I just want to make sure the other board members knew that if they wish to bring up a question, they can jump in. That was all. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Wright,
Yep.
again, I want to recognize you. I want to think more about the language here, but Councilor Wright?
So the MRT, if they tear down the house and put up a 1,500 square foot building, they could put the garage in the back of the lot. And that's like 4749 Chase Street. and it's a sloping lot. It doesn't slope all the way down to Breland, but it does slope down. And they separated that lot, and they're applying for MRT zoning. And they could, right now, they have a 4-foot, they're planning a 4-foot retaining wall, or just under 4 feet, around the lot, but they could put up a 10 feet or taller retaining wall in the back and say that it's needed because of parking. So I think it still is a problem, and that's for when they, and then also it would be a problem too, is if they keep the house, adaptive reuse, which I'm all for, but you're building out in the back and they want more of a level lot, but that they put the parking, I mean, some of these people, you know, play games and look at the loopholes and, oh, I'll put the parking in the back, and therefore I can build up my lot and make it flat because I have to access the parking there. The next thing is, I know of developers who are buying properties in the village centers right now. They're not waiting for us to change this rule so that they could do it by right. Unfortunately, there's a business in West Newton that has been there for decades, and the owners have not renewed their lease after, I don't know, 30 years there. And so to me, that says, you know, they have plans. So these developers, it takes time, you know, but I think we're going to see more and more of these coming in. And I don't think the problem is the retaining walls. And I feel the state is just getting a little too much into our business, into the details here. I thought, you know, we passed it, the Village Center overlay, and I would hope that they would trust us to do what we need to do. Thank you.
So we have to, I want to recognize Ms. Breckenridge from the Planning Board. That's her hand up. Oh, excuse me, I beg your pardon. It's not Ms. Breckenridge, it's Mr. Doringer. Mr. Doringer, your hand was on the image of Ms. Breckenridge, so my apologies.
Well, I apologize to Ms. Breckenridge for that, that outreach. Mention was made of the fact that the site plan review process by the planning board might be a guardrail in this respect. And I think what troubles me a little bit is that there's turnover in the membership of the board, memories are short and so forth. And is there some way that we might include in the VCOD zoning some kind of statement about the site plan review process being sensitive to this issue of retaining walls? Just so that we don't.
That's not the amendment that's before us, unfortunately. I mean, we can entertain further amendments, but that's not what's been advertised. I think, let me just express my own view at the moment. I'm concerned about sending anything up to the full council that has less than solid support in committee, when I do think there's a reasonable question about whether language relating to underground can be crafted that would still meet the intent of what we want to do, but not allow the concerns that have been expressed. So I'm prepared to entertain a motion to hold the item and allow the planning department another crack at looking at the language on this, because I don't think it's something I'm prepared to vote for in the current form, notwithstanding all the best efforts with the state. I think we have an obligation to do what's in the best interest of our community first. So I'd like to see the planning department take another look at this and see if we can solve this in a way that is responsive. But that's just my view. Councilor Wright?
Propose to hold it.
So you moved hold?
Yeah, move hold, sorry.
Okay, there's a motion to hold. All those in favor in committee of holding?
Aye.
1, 2, 3. Opposed? 2.
Aye.
3. So that's 4 to 3. The item's held. I'm going to try and see if we can get this done in very short order, because I think that the questions can be resolved. But Planning Board, your vote?
Yeah, I think we should hold. Could I have a motion to hold?
So moved.
So moved.
All in favor? 4-0.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we can talk afterwards, but I think that we understand the nature of the concerns. I think there's desire to move this forward, but we want to try and make sure we just make all the corrections that are possible at the moment. Okay, we got one other item, public hearing. This is chapter amendment to section 9.1 of the zoning. Do you want to tell us what that's about?
Yes, thank you. So this is the other item that was raised by the state as part of our conditional compliance. This is a pretty minor technical clarification. So essentially what the language that is in the overlay district says that it talks about allowing for existing buildings to opt in to the village center or opt into an overlay district. This is more broad than the village center overlay district. It allows existing buildings to opt in even if they're non-conforming to existing dimensional regulations. It does not allow non-conforming uses to opt in. The way the state read this was that all existing buildings, when opting in, would be considered non-conforming and would require special permits for any changes. So we did clarify our intent here, and that the special permit provisions are, the same as they are today, in that you only need that if you're extending that particular nonconformity. And then we added language clarifying that, basically if an existing building is fully conforming and is compliant with the zoning, it would not be considered nonconforming. So I'll share the red line language on the screen. And let's see. All right. Yes. So this is in 9.1.1, section A2. So if you see this section here, buildings or structures that lawfully exist pursuant to the underlying zoning district at the time a site opts into an overlay district, here's what we're adding, but do not fully comply with the dimensional standards contained in the overlay district, shall be deemed a non-conforming building or structure and shall be subject to the provisions of section 7.8. Sites with uses that are not permitted in an overlay district may not opt into the overlay district. So this is exactly what our intent was. It's just cleaning up the language a bit so that that's clear. Thank you.
Okay, any comments from members of the, excuse me, we have testimony from the public. Anyone wishing to testify on this item? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Councilor Oliver moves close. All those in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? Abstaining? Okay. Mr. McCormick?
Can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
All in favor, raise your hand. That's 4-0.
Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion on this item in committee or in the, otherwise? Councilor Albright.
This seems pretty straightforward. I don't know that there's much controversy here, but and maybe somebody else sees it, but I feel like we could move approval pretty easily on this one.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, I'd entertain any comments in your committee, Mr. McCormick?
No, thank you.
Okay. Entertain a motion to approve. Oh, excuse me, Councilor Maliki, you have a comment? Sorry, you're not in committee, but you're welcome.
More of a question. Maybe I'm just really dense here, but why would something that is conforming under the underlying zoning opt into the overlay zoning and be non-conforming?
If they could be conforming to the underlying zoning, but not conforming to the overlay district.
In that case, why would they bother to opt in?
There may still be benefit to opt in. One of the big goals of the overlay district was to allow the reuse of existing buildings. So it may still be favorable to opt into the overlay district.
Okay, I think I get that. Thank you.
Councilor Wright points out that inaudibility is a problem. I'm not sure it's me or who we is, but we'll try and make sure. Okay. Any further discussion? Councilor Getz.
See Attorney Lee.
Yeah,
I see Attorney Lee present, and if he might help the conversation citing an example.
Attorney Lee?
That's an example of what exactly? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I,
Okay, in the actual edition of the language, which I assume was added by you, could you clarify a bit in terms of just providing an example that would be, say, just in terms of a building that would, that fulfills this change?
so this changes, it's not even really a change, right? It's a clarification that has been requested by the state. It was always the intent that any building can opt in to the overlay district unless it is a use that's not permitted, right? It's a non-conforming use, then you can't opt in. We were struggling with the fact that it's not like normal zoning where once you change the zoning of any sort of area, any building in there, right, they're automatically in that zoning district. And what that means for the nonconformity is that anything that they had that's dimensionally nonconforming, that will automatically be a nonconformity. All we did here was make it clear that when you opt in, it's as if your lot was rezoned, because that's essentially what's happening. And that was, again, always the intent here. This additional language is only for the benefit of the state to clarify that intent. So I'm still not clear what you're asking for an example.
No, that's sufficient. I understand what you're saying.
Okay, any further discussion? I think Councilor Albright, you're prepared to move this item?
Yes, I'd like to move approval, thanks.
Okay. In committee, all those in favor will say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstaining? So I think that's 7-0. Mr. McCormick?
Could I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
All in favor? Raise hand. It's 4-0.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the public hearing discussion items, and members of the planning board, you're welcome to stay, but I think that is all that is required tonight for vote, but you're welcome to participate and stick around. Okay, now go on to, we have two appointees to the Zoning Board of Appeals, both as appointed as associate members. We'll take them in the order they're docketed. Item 38324, appointment of Charles Eisenberg, 4 Ashford Road, Newton, as a member of the Zoning Board of Appeal to a term of office to expire on November 18th, 2025. That's only a year away. And then there's a second item, 39124, appointment of Deborah Crosley as an associate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals for a term, again, to expire November 18th, 2025. It is our custom to ask members who are, or candidates who are nominated for a role like this to be able to answer questions. So I think Mr. Eisenberg will do that in a minute, and then members of the committee can ask questions. I will just say that as far as the process goes, this is a situation where the convention is, and I think we'll probably just follow it tonight, is that at the conclusion there'd be a motion on the appointment, and we'll discuss those separately. But there is a question that I want to point out because I'd asked for members of the council and the committee. Mr. Temple of the Law Department had prepared a comprehensive memorandum just describing the authority of the Zoning Board of Appeals under the state law when Newton has reached what is referred to as a safe harbor, meaning 10%, which means that, as I understand it, if the city has reached that threshold of 10% of affordability, the presumption in favor of a 40B project that it does not need to comply with local needs, it allows the Zoning Board of Appeals at the outset of a matter to decide to invoke the safe harbor, and then ultimately also to turn down a project even, which is not normally the case, or condition it even in ways that might make it uneconomic otherwise. So I think one of the questions that I'm going to ask Mr. Eisenberg and then Ms. Crosley afterwards is about the willingness to invoke the safe harbor and willingness to entertain, even in an extreme case, turning down a project that would otherwise go through without the safe harbor designation. So I just want to set that framework in front of everybody. And now I'll entertain questions, comments from members of the committee to Mr. Eisenberg.
No, I'll do whatever he wants. I don't.
He's right here. So anybody have a question for him? Councilor Albright.
So first of all, I want to thank you for being willing to serve. So thank you for that. And so your background really is in the development of housing, and particularly affordable housing. Mm-hmm. And well, I mean, you can answer the chair's question if you like, but
I'll answer it at some point.
And let's move a little closer to the mic, if you would. I'm sorry.
I'm as close as I can get. I'm going to
well, let's move the mic closer to you. Then just to make sure you're audible. That's all.
Is that okay?
Yes, that's better. Great.
Okay. Some of you know me. I've been involved in the city of Newton for more years than I care to mention. I chaired the Economic Development Commission for quite a while, and I've been on the Housing Committee. I've done consulting work for the city. I was involved with the Haywood project for the public housing. And what I am is a real estate development consultant with an emphasis on affordable housing. I've been doing this for a long time. I've spent a lot of time in front of zoning boards, and not just for comprehensive permits. There are a lot of other things that zoning boards do. I had the misfortune of being before a South Shore Zoning zoning board that got into about 2 weeks of work on an issue that was so esoteric that the Attorney General's office said, we really don't want to spend time on this, just negotiate it. But I've been at this a long time. I think I'm not a lawyer. What I bring to the zoning board is my experience and my abilities, particularly when it comes to analyzing projects, to determine whether they're appropriate, whether they're feasible, whether they're the right use for a location, and whether, in particular, I've taught real estate, I've taught real estate finance, and I can look at a project, take the information, and tell if something is feasible or not feasible, if a change is feasible or not feasible. When a developer says this is a deal killer, I'm pretty good at telling whether that's posturing or it's a real problem. And I think that's what I would bring to the board, is the ability to analyze projects and determine, what they can be, what can be changed, what can't be changed without killing them. I'm sorry, I saw hands, so I paused.
I'll recognize people, but I just want you responded.
Can I clarify my question?
Sure.
So it's somewhat related to the chair's question, but from my perspective, the difference between a 40B with safe harbor and not is that there's no housing appeals court for it to go to. So if we turn something down, there's no backup afterwards, which will assure that it will eventually get passed. But in my watching of the ZBA all of these years, I've never seen them vote on a project vote a project through because it would get overturned by the Housing Appeals Court. And as a matter of fact, recently they voted down the Washington Street project because they didn't think it was a good project, regardless of the safe harbor. So I'm wondering what your perspective is on that issue.
Well, I can tell you what my experience is. my experience is, and I've done multiple comprehensive permit projects, I've never had to go to the State Housing Appeals Committee. That is something that takes real deep pockets and a lot of time. And even if you do, usually there are also individual appeals by abutters, and those aren't covered by the decision of the Housing Appeals Committee. So you've got to deal with that in court anyway. So there's a tremendous incentive on the side of the developer, at least the ones that I consult with, to come to some kind of a compromise or to come to reach an agreement with the Zoning Board of Appeals. I have probably done 25 of these, and I've never had to go to the Housing Appeals Committee. I haven't always ended up with the project that I wanted, but it's not great to have to go to the Housing Appeals Committee. Nobody wants to. I have done projects where there were safe harbors under Boothroyd, the Boothroyd decision that allows ZBAs to entertain comprehensive permits. The interesting thing is, what I've seen the big difference was in the vetting process, that you can, there's information that you can look at and request and analyze that you can't technically under the 40B statute. And there are conditions that you can require that you can't under the 40B statute. So it's a broader process. You have to provide more, but it's not impossible. As to your question, I've been thinking about it, and I think the answer, the honest answer is, I think in most cases I wouldn't have a problem with invoking it, but I don't want to say never, because I've thought over the last hour of 2 or 3 cases that probably shouldn't go under safe harbor. So even though that's not the answer you want, I think my answer is usually I would think safe harbor is okay, but I would want to look at the individual cases. And that's, I don't want to have to come back in 3 years and say, oh, well, that was then and this is now.
I'm sorry, just didn't hear the last sentence.
I said I don't want to come back in 3 years and say that was then and this is now. I'd rather give you a less than satisfactory answer right now.
I appreciate that. And then Councilor Wright.
Thank you. So you said you know of some examples that you wouldn't evoke safe harbor. What examples would it be?
I'm trying to think how, I'll give you an example and try and, I have to cover it. I'm not supposed to talk about things that I've done with clients. There is a situation that I ran into where we received a comprehensive permit, and then the fire chief in the town sued the ZBA, challenging one of the provisions that they had agreed to. And we got into court and we went to mediation and we had to come to a compromise, and that required us to go back and get the comprehensive permit amended. And I don't think under those circumstances, if safe harbor had come in the meantime, that we should have had to have gone back under safe harbor. It was voted originally not under it, and that's the first thing that came to my mind. I'm not smart enough to think of every situation. I'm going to reserve the right to look at individual situations. I'm sure if I said never, that very soon something would happen where I said, geez, I didn't think of that. And I just, I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna tie myself down that way.
Let me clarify my question then. And if the matter came in the first impression, you described something that was a rerun, but if the committee, the zoning board of appeals has a decision to make right up front if we're in safe harbor to invoke it, and that's a threshold decision which gives it more authority. So the question is, in the conventional sense, is that something you're prepared to do or not? You've indicated a very unconventional sense.
But the honest answer is, I probably would. I'm not afraid of it. I don't think it's a problem. But I'm not going to stand here and say I would always invoke safe harbor. I don't have that much confidence in myself.
And the other question is, if the project were subject that, even if it went through safe harbor you weren't comfortable with, you would be comfortable not voting for it?
Would I vote against a project that I didn't think was a good project? Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For the same reason that I've turned down clients because I didn't like their projects.
Yeah, fair enough.
If it's not a good project, and by that I mean not just for the developer, but for the neighborhood and the city, I would vote against it. Sure, absolutely.
Okay, I just want to be clear. Thank you.
I
Councilor Wright.
have another question. So in your application, why do you think the ZBA will be the primary permitting vehicle for multifamily housing in Newton? Because right now, it is the special permit.
I should have been more tactful in the way I stated that. It's a comprehensive permit. Everybody calls it 40B, but technically it's a comprehensive permit. And that's because it doesn't just have attached to it the ability to appeal to the state. It also has a streamlined approval process that brings all of the decisions into one body and it's just a much cleaner, easier process to go through. So I think if that path is available to somebody, they go that path because it takes, it's clearer, it takes less time, you're negotiating with a smaller body, and my experience has been that it's easier than going through a special permit process and less expensive.
I have had developers tell me they prefer the special permit process over going through the 40B. So,
That's,
okay.
Again, I'm not always right.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have Councilor Danberg has her hand up. I'm sorry, I didn't see that earlier.
Thank you very much. I have known Mr. Rosenberg for a long time now, and in both observing him and in going to him on many occasions for advice on various things, I've seen him as a person who's very adept at stick handling projects to avoid long delays. And to identify issues that require negotiation, and he has the ability to get to yes on a lot of these very sticky, very emotional issues. I think that his expertise in many areas of housing would make him a skillful and a very valued player on the zoning board. And after the comments are finished, I would like to vote to approve.
Thank you. Other questions from anyone?
Mr. Chair,
Councilor Kalis.
could I just say that I just had a text from someone that says that the people online can't see the candidate because his back is to the camera. Could he join the planning board at the table?
I don't think that's going to make him any more visible, but Am I?
You want me to turn around for a second?
No.
I think we're almost, I think you could turn around for the camera so people could see what you look like for a moment. We're almost
I'm
done,
just
but
an older guy in a suit. I'm what,
there he is.
20 years ago, that's what we all looked like.
Yeah, yeah.
And I wore a suit tonight out of, you know, as a gesture to the chair, because I've known for longer than either one of us will.
Yeah, let's put it this way, a lot of water under the bridge, as they say, or whatever.
Yes.
Anyway, all right, other questions? Councilor Kalis, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. So I liked what you said there, that just because we may reach the 40B threshold doesn't mean the ZBA should reject all projects. I think that's wise. I want to know, how do you feel the ZBA has been doing as of late? And why?
How has the ZBA been doing as of late?
And let me
compared to other ZBAs, or
let me give
what?
you my perspective. I really like the way the ZBA has been operating as of late. I have been, watching for about 14 years since I've been involved, and I feel like, and this is coming at it from a different perspective than the technical expertise that you bring, but it's more bringing in the neighborhood and the residents and really listening and challenging projects, making changes to them more so than I saw in 10 years ago. They're still following the mandate to create housing, which I think is very important, but they're applying a little bit more objectivity, I would say, and that's my perspective. I'm wondering if you see that, if you don't see that, if you see that as important or not.
It's important. My experience with the ZBA was was with Haywood House when we went before them for a comprehensive permit. And I found them to be I'm going to get in trouble for this, the most competent and professional zoning board that I've been before for a comprehensive permit or otherwise. And I've been before an awful lot of them. That doesn't mean they were easy. They were not easy. They made us produce a lot of information. They made us spend a lot of time with the neighborhood and with the departments. But it was an intelligent, professional, no gotcha kind of a process. And I'd rather be before them than, on either side, frankly, than an awful lot of the other ZBAs.
Okay, any other questions? Councilor Leary, welcome to the committee again.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, Mr. Chair. Thank you for recognizing me. I just wanted to concur with Councilor Kalis regarding the tremendous work the ZBA has been doing. And I also wanted to express my appreciation with Mr. Eisenberg, as we are very proud of the Hayward House project in Nonantum, and so is the neighborhood. It's 100% affordable units, and it really is making a difference. I think that you would, with your experience and competence, you would be an excellent member, and I would certainly support you when I can vote for you before the full city council. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councilor Oliver. Somebody, and
Great,
Councilor
thank you, Chair.
Maliki, sorry.
So first, thank you for agreeing to serve. I think everyone here appreciates that. We certainly know the amount of dedication and the workload that comes with raising your hand in this particular case. So thank you for that. I am curious I want to make sure I understand the composition of the folks that serve on the ZBA. And I've heard you say, in response to some of the questions here tonight, that and I agree with you that once we reach, I'll just speak in the particular case of Newton, now that we are able to claim safe harbor, I completely agree with you. That doesn't mean that we claim safe harbor every time a comprehensive permit is put in front of us. What I am curious to hear a little bit about, or a lot about, is, and I think I heard you mention this before, what are the criteria that you believe would be important to consider about a 40B that comes into the city while we are in a position to claim safe harbor, that perhaps you cannot look at or consider when we don't have that status? In other words, when you don't have the ability to claim safe harbor, you have a limited set of circumstances under which you can say, look, we have to say no to this, here's why, right? Very limited instances. Safe harbor gives us the ability to shape this project to work that much better or that much harder for the city. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on some of those criteria.
It's interesting because, yes, the statute limits it significantly. But my experience with the reality of the process has been that you get a couple of weeks in and it becomes a matter of, well, we really want to know about this. And if we can't get comfortable with it, we know you don't have to give us this information, but if we can't get comfortable with it, then I may have to vote against it. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that's happened. So I don't know. I think that the kinds of things that you can get when you're outside of it that you can demand are financial statements to assure that the developer is competent, references. You can get much more deeply into the economic feasibility of the development because there are significant restrictions in 40B on issues of economic feasibility. You can push a lot harder on that issue and get really down to the question of, if you need changes, what's the impact going to be? I think that the reality of the negotiation, and it is a negotiation, isn't going to be as different as people think it is, because most of the negotiations on regular 40Bs don't really stay right within the limits of what you're required to do. It's the same as you're supposed to get a 40B decision within 90 days. So what happens when you get to 80 days and they still want to do public hearings? They say, well, do you want to allow us to extend it, or do you want us to turn it down? I mean, it's that kind of a process. So I'm not sure you're going to see it looking real different. I think you get more information sooner and without having to go through any kind of a struggle. And I think that just not being able to appeal will maybe make the negotiations go more easily, although in my experience, I'm always worried much more about the abutter appeals than I am about ending up at the HAC. I mean, you can get tied up for a couple of years just with the abutter appeals, and that's not going away. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's not an easy, it's not, I guess I've spent too much time in the practical side of it as opposed to the legal side of it.
Fair enough. I can appreciate the fact that the question isn't an easy one to answer, because I'm not exactly sure the answer that I'm listening for, but I do appreciate your response. Thank you.
Councilor Maliki, I think, and then I'll go back to Councilor Katz.
Thank you. let me start with the issue of abutter appeals. You seem to be suggesting that if a project is so bad that the ZBA would want to reject it, that there will also be abutter appeals. But my understanding is that the recent state legislation has made it much harder and financially risky and onerous for any mere sort of citizen to file an abutter appeal. Is that not the case?
Depends on your perspective. And it depends on the abutter. I had a project 8 years ago where the abutter was a high-tech CEO, and it didn't seem to matter how long it took or how expensive it was. Yes, I think it's more difficult than it was in the past, but if somebody came to me, a client, and said, you know, do we not have to worry about abutters? I would say, I think that's pretty stupid. I think you're taking a hell of a risk, and if you can work things out with them and satisfy them, as opposed to trying this, you know, these changes which haven't been tested in the court yet, that would be what I would think would happen.
Yeah, you might be correct when the abutter is some kind of corporation, but in Newton, most of the abutters are, you know, homeowners and not in a position to take that kind of risk, and they're counting on the city to protect their interests.
Well,
so I have a problem with the idea of not invoking safe harbor anytime we have it, because it's protecting the city's interests, our ability to, as you said, get information in a timely manner without being stalled, our ability to get a better project in terms of levels of affordability or numbers of units, and our ability to reject a project without the risk of having to incur legal expenses if the applicant appeals to the HAC. To me, invoking 40B, or not invoking 40B, it's kind of like suggesting that you've looked at a project and you're so confident that you like it that you don't think you need to, and to me that's sort of prejudging a project. Not invoking 40B, it's kind of like, you know, not putting on your seatbelt because you don't think you're going to need it. So I'm going to have a problem, I think, from now on approving anybody who isn't willing to invoke 40B safe harbor when we have it, as just kind of a precaution. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Getz?
Yeah.
And then I'd like to be heard. But,
Okay. I want to commend you and thank you for the work that you've done on the housing partnership.
Can you, Councilor Getz, can you
I know,
talk
I'm
into
trying
the
to
mic?
look at him and speak into the microphone. Okay, but I've watched you on the housing partnership, and you have contributed greatly to the discussion. I also appreciate that you, with Mr. McLaughlin stepping off of the ZBA, I think you will bring to the ZBA the expertise that's needed, you know, in terms of the economics that needs to be discussed in the you know, during 40B considerations. And then lastly, I would like to concur with Councillor Kalis and with Councillor Leary, you know, in terms of the Hayward House work, because in fact it's been a significant contribution for Nonantum in that area.
It's something that, let me just say, it's one of the projects I take my granddaughters by to see.
Okay, anybody else? Let me just comment, Mr. Eisenberg, I appreciate what I'm taking away is that this is a rare exception that you would not invoke the safe harbor, because you still have the opportunity to do that, and it would help the city's information side, if nothing else. I should indicate that Mr. Eisenberg is a resident of Ward 7, and I have known him for a long time in a number of capacities, and I think his willingness, let's say, at his station in life to come forward one more time is admirable, and we certainly should encourage that anytime we can. So I am prepared to move his approval And then we'll see where it goes in committee. If there's anyone else wish to be heard on the item? Okay, all those in favor will say aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? Any abstention? 2 abstentions. So I take that as 5 in favor, none opposed, and 2 abstentions. Is that correct? Am I correct, Ms. Norton? Mr. Eisenberg, thank you. Your nomination will now go before the full council.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being willing to spend so much time with us here. The next candidate is no stranger to this body. It's Deborah Crosley of 26 Circuit Avenue, as again nominated as an associate member of the Zoning Board of Appeals for a term of office to expire on November 18th, 2025. I think, Ms. Crosley, you've observed the conversation so far. I'm going to pose the same question to you about invoking safe harbor and also willingness to deny an item if it does not meet what you think is the community need. But you don't have to answer that right yet. I want to let other people ask questions and then go from there. Members of the committee? Anyone?
No questions?
Councilor Albright.
Well, I also want to thank you for being willing to serve. So thank you very much for stepping up. So the board, as I understand it, doesn't really have on it the technical expertise that you bring to the picture. I know just recently we approved, was it Jennifer Pucci, who is an attorney, and I asked her a question at the hearing. I said, in the face of the Clinton Street discussion that we've been having as a council, I asked her the question, what do you do if you don't understand the plans, and what do you do? Can you read the plans, and what happens? And she explained what she would do is that she would do the best she could and maybe ask questions if she didn't understand them. Mm-hmm. You clearly, as an architect, will understand the plans, and I don't think there's anybody else on the board that has that expertise. But I'm wondering how will you help this process if you see, are you willing to raise red flags and help the board deal with issues that have to do with the technical aspects of the project as opposed to the number of affordable units and so forth? I'm talking now about the actual, the technical, how will you bring your expertise to help the board?
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to just say good evening to everyone. It's interesting to be back here in a different place in the room. And thank you for hearing me. For anybody who, I know all you know a little bit about me from my work on the council. I've been in Newton, I'm going to just say a few things first, and I'll answer your question. I've been in Newton for almost 40 years. By April, it would be 40 years. I finished architecture school in 1983, and I've been registered since 1986, and I have worked for several firms, but for a long time, ran a practice out of my home, raising my kids and all that, and got very involved in the city of Newton in many capacities. My background is in environmental design and architecture, undergraduate and professional degree. And I've always found interest in city government and city planning and the work of the council and the work of that the community does in stewarding and shaping the built and natural environments. I think the Zoning Board of Appeals offers another opportunity to bring those skills to bear. As far as understanding the documents, that is part of the trade, and I have used for most of those years, both on the council and in my work, and I would bring it to the ZBA. It would be important. It's not the only skill that one needs on the ZBA, and I would be eager to learn from
others who have other skills, like the attorneys, like the real estate development consultant, and so forth. But there have been many occasions on the council and serving 10 years on the land use committee where many of my colleagues have, in fact, asked me to help them with the drawings, both while I served on the land use committee many years ago and even recently. And I'm happy to do that. Some drawings can be, and some documents, technical documents, can be difficult to discern. And what it gives me, that's my training, and what it gives me, I think, is the ability to ask questions about things that aren't clear on the documents. I know what I don't know. I know when the documents are not complete. I can tell when they are misleading or, you know, need more work. But the important thing, I think, on the Zoning Board of Appeals is, from my skill set, is I think what's very important about a quality project is that it fits in the community, it fits within the environment that it's being proposed to fit within. Context is very important from all kinds of vantage points, both in terms of massing and scale, in terms of how it addresses its boundaries, in terms of the site planning, transportation, access, egress, all that sort of thing. I think those are things that come up in the Zoning Board of Appeals, and they do, I have heard them dealing with such issues. And every project that comes before the ZBA, and I haven't been studying all of what they've been doing, but I think all of you know about the 528 Boylston Street project, for example. When that first came in, it did not have a good site plan. The mass of the building was too close to the neighbors. The circulation was not well done, and I believe that went through many months of push and pull to get it to improve. And then, I think there's two other things. Not only am I looking forward to learning from others, but I think my work on the council has given me, and especially on the land use committee when Weta Young was the attorney teaching us, I will say, is a real respect for the law, and this, of course, the state law controls the 40B process. But the intersection of that law, our ordinances, and what the limit of authority is of the body. And I think it's really important that the people on the ZBA have a respect for the law and do their homework, and I think they do.
Thank you.
Sure. Oh, and Councilor Baker, your question, I'm going to answer it really succinctly, I think. I read the February memo from the law department, and I called Mr. Temple because I had some questions about it. It says somewhere in that memo that by invoking safe harbor, you are saying, in so many words, I don't have the exact language, that the city has solved its affordability, housing affordability issue. But when I asked him that, I said, then we know that that's not the case, and so how determinative is that? And he said it's not.
Sorry, I just didn't hear that.
How determinative is that? You know, obviously, you can invoke safe harbor and still vote against the process. You cannot still vote against the project. You cannot invoke safe harbor, although that doesn't give you the discretion that you want. So I think that more times than not, probably, I don't know the numbers, I mean, maybe 9 times out of 10 or 90 out of 100 or 99 out of 100, the ZBA would choose to have more discretion if it was allowed to have more discretion. So I don't know if that answers your question, but like Mr. Eisenberg, I have to say it depends on the circumstances. He gave an example of a circumstance where it might not be appropriate to invoke safe harbor if the project were coming back. There might be very small projects. I was an architect on a 5-unit 40B project in Upper Falls many years ago, and it's rather small, and it went through many public hearings. It was a friendly 40B, and much neighborhood involvement. There were 2 in the area at the time, both very small, 5 units and 6 units, if I recall. And, might not be appropriate to invoke it in a case like that where the issues are so contained. I don't know. Does that help?
I take it your testimony, though, is that 90, you said 90 to 99, I'm not sure what the range is, but you would invoke it in most cases, majority of the cases?
I think that if, as you know, we're likely to go in and out of compliance with the Chapter 40B law, but
You
I
have to
think
be in the compliance in order to
Exactly.
have that right.
My sense is that it would be the predominant feeling that in order to have more discretion over a project, and many projects come in initially not perfect, imperfect, in order to have more discretion over the project, that you would invoke the,
I heard you say the board would you?
well, yes, if I were on the board, yes, I would.
All right, that's
I
it.
can't say I would do it 100% of the time.
And then you also indicate, I hope, to clarify, if the project still wasn't up to what you thought was appropriate, you could still, if having invoked it, you would turn it down?
Yes, but of course, if there was a refusal to, negotiate and respond to the concerns of the ZBA, and I doubt that would be the case. It seems to me that projects before the ZBA currently and in recent years, which when we have not met safe harbor, have been modified, sometimes fairly substantially, in order to meet certain requirements that the board felt was important.
I stipulate that they would be rare cases.
Yes, rare cases.
Okay, thank you for responding. I do want to recognize 2 colleagues who are online that have had their hands up patiently. And first inside the committee, Councilor Danberg, and then I will go to Councilor Lipoff.
Thank you very much. I have known Deb for a long time. I know that she has a very long history of service and involvement to the city. Her input has been tremendously valuable on many occasions. Also, her skills and expertise as an architect, as she has laid out for us, her familiarity with housing laws, with city processes, and with state building codes, all of which come up in almost every item that goes before ZBA. Her ability to read plans and her expertise in the technical areas, I think, would make her a very, very valuable asset to the ZBA. Again, if I know she's from Ward 5, and if I have a colleague from Ward 5 that would like to move this forward, I would gladly cede to my Ward 5 colleague, and if not, I would be her backup in moving to approve.
Thank you, Councilor Danberg. Councilor Lipoff, welcome to the discussion of zoning and planning.
Yes, thank you very much. I've got to say, being on the council for 24 years on land use and involved in every aspect. You know, there are people that care and that give their day job and their knowledge to the city council and to this city. And Deb Crossley is one of them. And we should not look back at the disparate, the fight over anti-development, pro-development, all of this anger and the division that has happened in this city, and to place blame on individuals. Deb Crossley did yeoman's work at trying to renew and revive a zoning document that hasn't been changed since 1953. And there were people that agreed and disagreed with where she was coming from. Her expertise, her love for this city, her passion, and her reasonable thinking is why we are, and why the mayor has chosen her as somebody who could give her time, her effort, her wisdom, and her expertise to the ZBA. We can disagree with each other, but we have to acknowledge who has stepped up and said, here I am, who has stepped up and said, I will bring my day job to this city. And this committee is multiple people, and not one person is going to steer anything. But as a collective, they bring the knowledge that we need to analyze what's happening at the ZBA. And I think there is nobody more qualified and nobody more important and nobody who has given their soul and time to this city than Deb Crossley. So I just wanted to come tonight and say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and again, we're always glad to have you as part of the committee discussion. I have members of the committee who wish to be heard. I think I have Councilor Wright and Councilor Kalis and then Councilor Getz. Have I got everybody who wants to be heard? Councilor Wright?
Thank you. The discussion of development has simply been too divisive over the last few years, and it doesn't need to be that way. We can increase density while keeping what people love about Newton, but that will only happen if we appoint people to boards and commissions who are interested in respectful engagement and truly listening to our residents. Ms. Crossley is a passionate advocate for her views, but there are others who are more skilled at listening and taking positions that respect the wide variety of positions within our city. Working with Ms. Crossley for 4 years on ZAP, I've seen firsthand that she is not open to difference of opinions backed by data and facts. She pushes her own agenda. The residents of Newton did not support her for city council and voted her out. I will not support Ms. Crossley for the ZBA. Thank you.
Councilor Kalis?
Thank you. And thank you, Mrs. Crossley, for your candidacy, for stepping up. So despite all of your technical ability, years of experience, I think it's actually unfortunate that you come before us, in my opinion, with a clear disadvantage. I think if you were proposed to be a ZBA member in a few years, you'd fly through. You have all the qualifications, all of the expertise. But you were just chair of ZAP during one of the most contentious zoning debates that we've had in years. And then the community told us that we got it wrong. So my question about your candidacy is that it's too soon. The past ZAP committee, it can be argued, just went too far, and we pushed too much for what the community actually wanted, which means we weren't listening. We lost objectivity. My question isn't about your technical abilities. It's really about, can you convince me that you'll be able to be objective, to be able to balance the mandate to build housing with the concerns of the community? Because to me, that's what the current ZBA is doing quite well, and I want to make sure it does in the future.
So the question is, it's not really a question, you're challenging me to convince you that I will be objective.
That's the question. Can you be objective?
Yes, I believe I can be objective. I believe my 10 years on the Land Use Committee shows my objectivity. I believe we did listen to all sides, but we had data in front of us that painted a picture. We had two things going on in zoning and planning, which I will speak to very briefly because it's not what this appointment is about. One was we were trying to address the challenges that Newton as a city faces, which simply put, observing over decades that our small businesses are struggling, observing over the last decade that our schools are losing enrollment, observing over decades that young families are having more and more trouble moving into our community, and that demographic is shrinking. All of those things are true. You're shaking your head. We all have recognized that all of those things are true. And that our elderly population is growing gangbusters, and that many of those folks have nowhere to go but to stay in their homes whether they want to or not, or, as we heard in a recent seminar, go into nursing homes, and most people don't want to do that. So we have these challenges in our community, and it became clear to us through our studies and efforts and our consultants' plans and so forth, that developing housing at a wide range of price points for a wide range of people, all means and ages and abilities and so forth, is part of the solution to each one of those challenges. So that was the one thing we were doing. The other thing was, along came the state mandate. And so we used our work to satisfy that mandate. There was a huge amount of listening, but as you know, we can't satisfy everyone. You know, and we can't be, you know, we try to be Solomon, but you know, you don't want to cut the baby in half. We did cut the baby in half. So that's just the facts. I stepped up to be, I guess, the leader of the band, not the creative. We had staff and consultants who are the creatives. Enough said. Every project that comes before the City Council and its Land Use Committee has to be dealt with on its merits and according to the law. I think I said that earlier. I have a deep respect for the law, even if I feel the ordinances are broken, which some still are, and you are continually charged with repairing those ordinances. We repaired many. You're going to go again at the inclusionary ordinance. You're going to go again at the ADU ordinance, you know, et cetera. It's an ongoing process. But whatever the law is at the time, the ordinances that are guiding what we're able to do have to guide the work that comes before us. The state law for Chapter 40B, which I'll say too, as Mr. Eisenberg said, the Zoning Board of Appeals does address other issues, but I understand this is the one of concern. When a Chapter 40B project comes before the Zoning Board of Appeals, the state law is primary, because it allows the developer, as you know, to sidestep dimensional requirements, not all requirements, but dimensional requirements, in order to, as long as they provide a certain percentage of deed-restricted affordable units. So but what I said earlier about, here's my opportunity to bring some of my profession to this body. Context is really important. I mean, there are public hearings and people want this or they want that, okay? But as a land use committee on the city council and as the zoning board of appeals looking at a chapter 40B comprehensive permit, either way, you're supposed to be deciding the project based on the merits of the project. Does it conform to the legal requirements? And then, does it fit within its context? Has the traffic been solved? Has the massing been solved well? What kind of access are there to amenities and, for the people who are going to live there? Maybe has supportive retail. How well does that fit into the environment? Just what is that project and how well does it work in that place?
Thank you. I mean, I know you're supposed to, on the ZBA, evaluate based on the merits, but the community has to have a say.
Of course.
And you're right, there were many things that you did so well, and I think Councilor Lipoff articulated them, the way that, and also you did all the research, you convinced many of us, rightly, with the data. I think all of us missed certain elements of it, the extent to which we were pushing, and that's why I think it's just too soon. And for me, that's an issue.
I recognize Councilor Getz, I believe.
Okay. As we all know, the ZBA is a quasi-judicial body which is tasked with interpreting and enforcing the city's zoning ordinances. The ZBA hears and decides on petitions for appeals of our zoning ordinances and decisions made by the ISD commissioner. It also hears variances from the requirements of the zoning ordinance. But the ZBA, most importantly, is the permit granting authority for comprehensive permits. And I consider this a significant responsibility which requires balanced judgment. As we all know, the ZBA appointments serve at the pleasure of the mayor, but we as city councilors serve at the pleasure of the residents of Newton. Now this is where it gets personal. When I was elected, I needed to change my civic role from one of citizen advocate to an elected representative of the residents of Newton. I take this role seriously. My obligation, my position on matters is based on my understanding of the will of the majority of the residents of Newton. I state this criteria as my foundation as a city councilor. Deb Carsley, I thank you for your years of public service and your willingness to continue in public service. And I can commend you for your continued advocacy serving as a member of Newton for Everyone Steering Committee. Thank you.
We have Councilor, I'm going to recognize Councilor Albright and then go to Councilor Lipoff again, who's spoken before. Councilor Albright.
So,
oh, excuse me. And Councilor Leary, apologies, I didn't see you.
So I served on the Land Use Committee for 12 years, I think it was, and at some point during my tenure on that committee, maybe it was at the time Alderman Crossley joined the committee, and I can tell you that the quality of the review of the projects that came before that committee changed when Ms. Crossley was with us. And I think, I mentioned it earlier, but I think that the Clinton Street project is a symptom of what we don't have on the Land Use Committee, which is somebody that really understands architecture and plans, but that's a whole other issue. But what Councilor Crossley brought to the Land Use Committee was a way to make every project better, and if the project couldn't get better, we didn't approve it. So I think that's probably the most important factor that we need to take into account when we vote for this appointment. This is not a job to write zoning code. This is not a job to have anything to do with zoning. It has to do with looking at projects and making them better, and if they can't make them better, you don't vote for them. And that's exactly what happened on the Land Use Committee. And how can you say it's too soon? It has nothing to do with the zoning ordinances. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with reviewing a project and making it better, and if it can't be made better, you turn it down. It's as simple as that. And I'm not going to get dragged into a discussion about elections or zoning or the VCOD or anything like that. This is a job to review projects and make them better, and if you can't make them better, you vote them down. And this applicant has the qualifications to help the Zoning Board of Appeals. They do not have another person that has that technical qualifications on the board, and she will bring that to the job. And I just don't understand anything else that's been discussed here that's a negative.
Thank you. I've got Councilor Leary, but I have a member of the committee who hasn't spoken. If you'd bear with me for a minute, I want to just, Councilor Oliver? You want to wait? Okay. Councilor Leary, then I'll go back to Councilor Lipoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to align myself with the comments of Councilor Lipoff, Danberg, and Albright. I have been had the honor of serving with then Councilor Crossley, and also worked with her with the League of Women Voters. I can't think of a more qualified candidate for the ZBA. I think we're extremely fortunate that Deb Crossley is willing to take on this role. And we know, we all, I think most of us have been watching the ZBA. I know I have been watching it very closely with a number of important Ward 1 projects that have been going on. I have been very impressed with the work. And I know that our former colleague would be a tremendous asset. And I just think it would be incredibly short-sighted, misguided to not appoint her with her particular skills as an architect. We don't have anyone else on the ZBA who has that particular talent. She would strengthen and expand the ability of our already highly competent ZBA to be able to evaluate projects. I don't understand why people are conflating policymaking and zoning reform issues with the very different role of the ZBA. And especially when we are having a hard time finding people. Remember, people actually volunteer their time on the ZBA. It's a very difficult job. And I think it's important to have a variety of skills and talents. But to have someone like our former colleague, a licensed architect with deep knowledge of the city of Newton, of our zoning rules, of policy making, she's thoughtful. She does listen. In my experience, I've heard her look at everybody's views and be thoughtful about it. It's just that not everyone likes a decision that perhaps she comes up with, including myself. I have not agreed with Councilor Crossley on everything. But I really appreciate her ability to step up. I'm probably not convincing people that have already dug in and made up their mind. But when this comes before the full city council, I will again advocate for Councilor Crossley for the ZBA, and I strongly urge my colleagues to also support her as a new member. I think it's a very, very important decision, and I don't think we should pass this by. And again, to my former colleague, I very much appreciate you taking the time to come before us and offering to serve on this role. Thank you.
Thank you. I noticed Councilor Lipoff, Councilor Greenberg has joined the discussion and she has not spoken. Are you comfortable to let me just recognize her first and then come to you? Thank you very much. Councilor Greenberg, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I won't reiterate everything that Councilor Leary has just said, but just as Counselor Albright has noted, that I have worked with former Counselor Crossley on the Land Use Committee for many years. And I have firsthand knowledge of how much better she's made each project before us on that committee. Her intelligence, her expertise was such an important aspect of that committee and helped us make wonderful decisions for the city on projects that were before us and important to the residents and to the city to get these projects done in a more expedited way. So I urge the committee to please approve this appointment, and I thank Ms. Crossley for applying for this position. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lipoff.
Yeah, let me say that I wish there were 2 microphones that Councilors Albright and Leary could just drop right now, because they just said it all. You know, policy reform and zoning reform are 2 different things. And what Councillor Crossley was endowed with to create, since 1953, a new zoning reform that went the way it went, and we all understand that, has nothing to do with her expertise and her one vote on the Zoning Board of Appeals to give her expertise to the moment. And that's what we're talking about here. She has proven herself. I have been on the Land Use Committee for 24 years. I've chaired it, and I've had many people come through. And she has been a yeoman to reasonableness. We have to understand that the contention around where our zoning went is in a lane that has nothing to do with honoring and garnering her expertise on the ZBA. And what we need to get past in the city of Newton, in the state of Massachusetts, and in our country is this us and them, this all or nothing. We have to recognize the people in our own community. Do you know how many people say to me, I don't know why you do what you do. I would never do it. There are so many people in our community that have a criticism for what we do, but would never step up to serve. Deb Crossley steps up to serve time and time again. And we need to honor that, and we need to understand what her expertise is. And we need to understand that this position where she is exactly where she needs to be. And we need to thank her for her service. Thank you.
Thank you. We've now been joined by the 8th member of the committee, Councillor Krentzman. Welcome. Well fed, I hope. Anyway, yeah. I can go to Councillor Oliver.
Great, thank you, Chair. So other than the fact that we have no strong opinions about this conversation here tonight, I am very curious to kind of go back to a few of the questions, one of which was posed by Councillor Kalis. I am intrigued by the statement you made about context being so important to perhaps not in particular 40Bs, but to projects, especially larger ones. And I am curious, similar to the question that I posed earlier to our previous appointee, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts as to what you think would change in your approach to a 40B or a comprehensive permit when we're under, or we have the ability to claim anyway, safe harbor or not. Because I do believe that that is a massively important factor in this process.
Can you just get a little closer to the mic?
No.
Off. Oh,
There
there
you
we
go.
go.
There you go.
Sorry about that. I might have done that. So I think that the law is clear on this point. What changes is, there's several things, as Councillor Albright mentioned. You go to a different court to appeal. The developer, if they are denied, goes to a different court to appeal, and that would be a very expensive and unsure process. So, as you know now, the overwhelming majority of appeals are by the community, by anyone, of a decision by the ZBA to approve a project. The majority of appeals are denied. In other words, the project is approved. So that's a huge difference. Another huge difference is that the economic feasibility of the project is not an issue if safe harbor is invoked. In other words, the developer cannot claim economic hardship, even if it exists, is how I read the legal department's memo. So, which is an odd thing in a way, because if you think the project is so poor, so out of context, so badly conceived that I or other members of the ZBA would put conditions upon it to make it a great project, but one that is economically infeasible, of course it wouldn't happen. But that is the way I read the memo. And what I understand to be true. I'm not sure if you're asking me personally what changes, but personally it is not relevant, because I think the law is determinative about the degree of authority that the ZBA has in one case or the other. Am I getting your question?
You're getting there. Keep going. Yeah.
I think I'm done.
If you're done, all right. Well,
But
all
if
right.
you have,
Okay.
if there's something else, I'm not sure where to go with it.
May I just interject maybe
Sure.
a further clarification? The memo is, I think, extensive, and your recitation of what it says is accurate. I think the question for me and several other people is when you reference context, the ability you have to bring your architectural learning and your experience with the rules of the road, so to speak, to the conversation is without doubt. The question that I think people are wrestling with, and I'm wrestling with, to be candid, is that will you exercise that in the interest of the community at large, as well as the immediate context, meaning the abutters, if you feel that the project warrants that?
If I feel the project warrants it, of course.
Because I think what the flavor of the concern is that this is a situation where you have these abilities and concerns, but will you apply them in the context that people are concerned about? And that's, I want to give you a chance to answer that, and I think you just did, correctly?
I think I did.
Yep, no, I'm not saying you didn't, I just
Yeah, thank you for that. And if I may, just kind of one additional thought, and something that kind of concerns me from comments that I've heard on this side of the rail, if you will. Every single member of the city council bears a responsibility to bring one thing to this discussion: their experience. Their opinion is their own, and all of them are valid. Don't try and invalidate anyone else's opinion here, please. I find it offensive. Please stop it. Thank you for your time. I do appreciate it.
Are there any other comments from members of the committee or otherwise on the observers? So it's open to motion at this point. Is there a motion before the council, the committee? Sorry?
Yes, I made a motion.
You indicated you would, but you hadn't, so I was just
Oh,
going to
all
give
right.
you the chance.
I make a motion to approve
right.
Counselor,
Okay.
former Counselor Crossley for
All
the
right.
ZB
Okay,
as associate member.
all right. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, we're going to do this on a show of hands, so I think everybody's clear on where, oh, excuse me, Counselor Krinsman, you haven't been heard. Do you wish to ask a question, or, I'm sorry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a quick comment because I missed a lot of the discussion. I apologize. I was out at an event and I missed some of the discussion. Was listening most recently to the last couple of comments that were made. And just want to say a couple words about how I'll be voting and why. Before I joined the city council, I knew Councillor Crossley, and she may recall, but I have told her this. I did not agree with everything that she did. I didn't agree with every vote that she took. And frankly, I didn't even always agree with the way that she spoke about items and again, the votes that she took. But even in those times, I always had tremendous respect for the homework that she did, her thoroughness on approaching items, and the dignity that she brought to the office of city council and her approach and her demeanor. I think she was the consummate professional. I think she was never caught off guard. And I think she is diligent and thoughtful. For those reasons, I completely stand by her ability to discharge the duties on the ZBA, which again, are different than those of a city councilor. And as I've said, plenty of us, had disagreements with, policy positions she may have taken or we may have taken. But there's no doubt in my mind that she is probably the most qualified person in the city to discharge the offices or the duties incumbent upon a member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. So I'm going to be voting in support of what I believe Councilor Danberg has moved, which is approval.
Thank you. I guess I should explain my vote. So I wanted to ask the questions I did because the ability of Councilor Crosby to do the job is, I think, manifest. And I want to give her the benefit of the doubt on the question of disposition, because I think it's important that the voices in the ZBA be impartial and looking at the projects as clearly as possible from the point of view of, does the project work in the context, as she's indicated. Her comments tonight have satisfied me that she has not only the ability to do this job, but the disposition. So I will support her nomination. But I am going to do it with the understanding this is a short-term appointment. We're all trying to make sure that the ZBA functions as well as it can. And while I agree with Councilor Krinsman, her qualifications are admirable, I wouldn't want to diminish the qualifications of those we've just voted for in the committee or those who already serve on that body, whom all are very able. So I just want to say that we are lucky to have them and have them do what they do. So I just wanted to explain where I come out. All right, all those in favor will say aye. Aye.
Aye.
So that's Councilor Danberg, Councilor Krinsman, Councilor Baker, anyone else? And Councilor Albright. Okay, all those opposed?
Aye.
2 opposed, Councilor Wright and Councilor Oliver, and Councilor Kalis, and Councilor Getz. So we have 4-4. That is a motion that does not prevail. So I have to report that to the council. But that's the vote of the committee. But thank you for your time, and this will be coming before the council.
Thank you. And if the council should deem it proper to appoint me, I will be honored to serve.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to declare a short recess, and then we reconvene in just a few moments. All right? All right, folks, can we reconvene? All right, let's go back. I need to clarify for the public and those who may be interested, the net effect of the vote we just took is that the item did not succeed, so it will have to be reported as a denial, but I'm sure that conversation will occur at the City Council, just so everybody understands the process. Okay? So the last set of items are actually several, and they are the items relating to the teardowns, and we have a memorandum, but also a presentation from the Planning Department. These are The item is 8524, discussion of possible amendments to enhance the preservation of existing homes and amend the setbacks to encourage preservation of existing buildings. So, we're going to have a presentation from Ms. Kyra or Mr. Pease. Who's on deck on this one?
So I'm going to start out. We also have our consultants from UTIL online. I know we have Lauren Rapport online. I'm not sure if Tim Love is on. I just see Lauren at the moment. So we're going to start off the presentation, then Lauren will present and it'll come back to staff at the end. So let me just share my screen. Let me just go into presentation mode. Okay, so we're here following up on the residential zoning analysis, looking primarily at the issue of teardowns and creating modest-sized new homes. So tonight we're going to do an introduction. We're going to briefly talk about the idea of zoning use realignment. And then we're going to discuss a number of options for supporting modest-sized homes. So again, why we're here is really looking at new development, identifying trends, and analyzing factors that lead to teardowns, including zoning and non-zoning issues. Tonight, in particular, we're going to discuss initial ideas for concepts that support modest-sized homes.
Ms. Kyra, I just want to clarify. I think the way the conversation was to try and preserve the modest-sized homes, but I just want to indicate that you're going to talk about a variety of options that I think were not before us before. So I want you to go ahead, but I want to be cautious about the scope of where we're going with this. So carry on.
So our presentation this evening is primarily responding to the concepts that were presented from Councilors Oliver and Wright last time. So again, we're here in November. We are looking to share some recommendations when we come back in December. So the first one we wanted to respond to was the idea of zoning use realignment. This was a concept that was presented by Councilors Oliver and Wright at one of the prior meetings last month. And the issue being residential development in business zones. Some of the issues are that the setbacks are less consistent in the business zone and do not recognize adjacent residential uses or whether the development on site is fully residential. It also allows for fully by right business or mixed-use buildings in neighborhoods that may be predominantly or entirely residential. So we believe some of the solutions here are to rezone some areas to residential zones, as you probably would not want to see a commercial use come in by right in those areas, and to revise setbacks or other dimensional controls in the business zones for fully residential buildings. We believe this is a worthy effort, but we intend to take this up as a separate effort from this particular analysis around teardowns. So now I'm going to hand it over to Lauren Rapport from UTIL, who's going to be looking at the various options regarding modest-sized homes.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. So one of the options that was proposed was to look at potential to use new lot standards for teardowns. As many of you may know, Newton has two different sets of dimensional standards for lots, and these depend on whether the lot was created before or after December 7th, 1953. From the case study analysis that we last presented a month ago, many of those case studies of teardowns were for older lots, so those were using the old lot standards. So the table that you see in front of you here represents the new lot standards, and when you compare them to the old lots, you'll notice these are showing higher minimum lot area, less maximum lot coverage, more open space, higher minimum lot frontage, and greater front and side setbacks. We do think that parts of this merit further study, and so we're going to be looking into what it could entail to have greater side setbacks for the new construction that replaces demolitions. But we do want to be mindful that, that will play out very differently on smaller sized lots. So that's just going to require some more study. So when we look at how this played out in the case studies that we previously analyzed together, you can see the difference among the drawings that are presented in front of you here. The darker blue represents setbacks that are tied to the new construction, and the lighter blue represents the setbacks that were of the previous homes that were on the site before it. And you can see just, in this overlay how pronounced that difference is, and that the new construction is really going up against those setbacks and trying to maximize the building as best as they can. So we're looking at multiple different ways that we can think about setbacks among a whole set of toolkits, or a whole set of standards that can be thought of as a toolkit. And so what we're going to show you tonight are just the beginnings of ideas. They're not recommendations yet around particular metrics that we think should be put forward, but we just wanted to test out on different sized lots how these criteria would play out. So as an example, the drawing on the left is using 7.5-foot side setbacks, which is something that you see a lot on the older lot standards. And you can see how that feels when you have a building that builds to those side lot setbacks. And I should mention also the drawing on the left and the drawing on the middle are both 15,000 square foot lots. All of the drawings represent the same FAR. So really it's just trying to understand how that FAR gets redistributed when you're playing with different size setbacks. So you can see the difference with the middle drawing that's got 15-foot setbacks. And then on a narrower lot condition, as the drawing on the right indicates, you can see that we'll have to be a little bit more considerate around what number for side setback will be appropriate there, so that it will result in viable building forms. Another thing that we're thinking about testing further is the potential to tie setbacks to building height. So looking at ways to maybe have greater building height if you have larger side setbacks. So again, these aren't recommendations for heights just yet, but these drawings were trying to explore what would happen if you have lower building height. It's possible when you're using smaller side setbacks versus greater building heights when you have bigger side setbacks, as you can see in the middle drawing. Another thing that we think is going to be important to play with, and that will certainly make a big difference in the new construction if it were applied, is to have a maximum facade build out. And so you can see how that would work in concert with side setbacks. And what that means is it's providing a further control to limit how wide the building can be along the lot line that faces the street. So you can see how that plays out when you're applying a maximum build out of 60%. And again, we'll have to just give a little bit more care into what happens on those narrower lots. Because as you can see on the drawing on the right, if you've got a lot that's only 60 feet wide and employing setbacks already, it might just be that you limit it so that it's a maximum within those setbacks, but we'll be studying that further together. And then lastly,
wait a minute, before you leave that, I just think, if you don't mind pausing for a moment, because the setbacks is a special issue by itself, as I understand it. So I just want to see if there are members of the committee have any questions about that aspect. Anybody? Councilor Wright? Councilor Kalis, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. So it's a good idea. Has this been implemented anywhere? It's just the reality of it is that it then reduces, well, probably in most of these suggestions, it's going to reduce the resale for many people that want to sell to a developer. but that's part of this. So, but I'm just wondering if this has been implemented anywhere and what the results have been.
Sorry, can you be more specific if which part of this has been implemented elsewhere?
Just minimizing the or reducing the size of the setbacks for a tear down.
Okay, I think you mean increasing the size of the setbacks, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're looking at it that way.
But the question is what? I just need to understand. Did you get the question? I just want to understand what your question
Right,
is.
right. It's has this been implemented anywhere?
Not here.
Not here. No, I know that. In the country, though.
I'm sure, dimensional controls like this are things that do change over time. So I'm sure there are examples of increasing setbacks.
Right. I mean for specifically residential for tear downs.
We can look into that for the next meeting if you want
Okay.
specific examples.
That's fine. If we pursue this, that's just what's jumping out at me.
Okay. So I just want to, Councilor Wright, your question?
I didn't follow quite about, if you have increased the height, you would have bigger setbacks. Are we talking at 36 feet is the norm, which is what our zoning is, which is pretty tall? And then are you saying, well, if you want to do a 40-foot or a 46-foot tall
No.
building, then you have to have a bigger setback?
No, that's not what we're saying.
Okay.
We're saying that the setbacks could be tied to the height. We're not proposing additional height. So if you have 1 story, maybe your setbacks are less than if you go the full 2.5 stories, 36 feet.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor, yes.
Yeah, I like this idea a lot, in terms of the maximum facade build out. And we had seen it before when we were doing the earlier zoning reform. But my question is really for Andrew Lee. I mean, just in terms, and I see him, but I don't know if he's able to answer this question. Just in terms of old lot, new lot, and that we are dealing with a preserved, pre-existing right that the lot has. Can we do this? Can we actually, have a designation of a maximum facade build-out on an old lot?
So I haven't followed exactly how this is going to be implemented in terms of what would be considered an old lot and what would be considered a new lot, and that would be critical to the analysis of whether or not it would be legally permissible. If this has any merit, I can work with the planning department to determine exactly kind of, again, what point in time we're looking at.
Thank you.
Okay. I just want to clarify that before we move to another thing, I just want to indicate that I'm sympathetic to the idea of doing something along these lines. So, because I think that part of the problem that we've seen is that the buildings that are replacing the older structures are going out, as you pointed out, right to the envelope that they could be built to, where in fact the old buildings were not, and it's producing an impact in the above and beyond what people, I think, expected. Okay, go to the option 2, I think.
Yes, thank you. So for option 2, we're beginning to study the potential to have a reduction in FAR that's tied to lot size, particularly looking at larger reductions for large lots. So again, we need to study what that FAR reduction could be, but we tried to tease out just to illustrate what these could look or feel like on a couple prototypical lots. So we started looking at a 20,000 square foot lot on the left, 15,000 square foot lot in the middle, and a 10,000 square foot lot on the right. And just playing with numbers within the ranges of what was proposed by Councilors Wright and Oliver. And you can see how, potential ways that may play out. And FAR, as you know, certainly is one way to control density, but it's a very loose form of control. And so we think that, being able to reduce FAR is something that would be best coupled by looking at other standards as well. So, you know, considering the other standards in our toolkit, whether that's the maximum facade build out, setbacks, height, etc. So the blue parts of the drawing of the buildings in these diagrams illustrate what could potentially be reduced in the FAR as a function, as a ratio of its lot size. So just a little visual example of how those reductions might play out tied to the lot size. But we'll be studying this further and would like to continue to work on this.
Councilor Oliver, and excuse me, Councilor Wright. I'm sorry, Councilor Wright.
Thank you.
You were-
I have a question for the consultant. Lexington is doing this. Have you contacted them to see how well it's going?
That's a great question. I think we need to get in touch with them and learn what's working well or not.
And what Councilor Oliver and I were proposing, we knew not one item could, quote, fix the problem. Otherwise, it would have been done a long time ago. But we do need a combination of items to work together. Thank you.
Councilor Oliver?
So, and I just, I also want to make sure that, building on that, I want to make sure that we weren't unclear when we talked to this a few weeks ago. I believe that this concept, when we put it out there, had a chart to it that was, I think it was this one. The numbers that we had put in there were completely directional and for example only. Certainly weren't right. I just want to make sure that we were clear on that part, because to your point, or what I'm hearing in this particular response or kind of extension is right on, because I don't think the numbers that we had in there were meant to be considered starting points by any means. Just directional. Hey, what if it were 10% and then 15 and then 19% based on lot size? So thank you.
Councilor Wright again.
And I'd like to continue on that is, I did take a look at what Lexington was proposing and seeing what their FAR was in different sizes. And, you know, we have a bigger FAR and bigger lots and blah, blah, blah. And again, just grab some numbers somewhat related to them, but just pulling them out. So I'm not tied to 20% reduction of FAR on a, was that 20,000 square foot lot. I mean, that was more as a starting point. And maybe, you know, maybe the number is, you know, 15%, or maybe it's 40%, who knows, but just wanted to put something in there as a starting point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Albright.
Thank you. I think it's maybe because I'm seeing this all for the first time, but I'm having a hard time understanding the size of the building. I mean, I can see there's a reduction in the three different examples, but I don't know what size the building is before it was reduced and what size it is after it's reduced in terms of, square feet. Or I need more information to be able to understand these charts. So I'm hoping that you can make this easier to be understood by others. If there's any way that you can talk about square feet or stories or length and width of the buildings, it would just help me get a better understanding of what these pictures really mean. So if at some point when it goes, even before it goes into the packet, if you could provide a little bit more information, it would be helpful. That might be too soon since the packet is tomorrow, so never mind. But at some point to provide more information.
So we've got, let me just add my own comment. I think part of what the genesis of all this, and one of the docket items, was that there were buildings that were replacing smaller structures that were too big for the lot, even though that they conformed to the zoning. So again, the adjustment in the dimensionals of setbacks and the FAR maybe together are an important potential tool. It doesn't mean it's the only tool, but it would tend to reduce the scale of what is being built on these lots after they're torn down. And that's the challenge we have. So I hope that the utility will take another look at that, but I think Councilor Albright's point is accurate. We need to understand a little bit about what the building envelope itself is, not just the lot size. And these lots are obviously all nice and rectangular. Not all lots are nice and rectangular, but that's a whole other issue. Okay, carry on, please. I just wanted to get comments from the committee as we go. Are the doors, can somebody close the doors? It's just hearing a little noise there. And it's hard to hear.
Okay. Moving on to the next slide, one of the other ideas that was raised was the idea of large house review. Wellesley is the main example of another community that conducts this. So we had a really informative call with the director of planning in Wellesley, and the large house review process seems to act similar to our special permit process. Their special permit process is very different from ours in that all the special permits go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and planning staff is not providing analysis or guidance on those. So they're spending a lot of their time focused on large house review, which is going to the planning board. Other than that, it looks similar. So it was created partially to address the idea of teardowns, similar to us, the mid-century and later homes that were smaller homes that were being torn down and replaced, partially to get at some of the elements that we regulate separately through ordinance. So they don't regulate stormwater. So the large house review is really important in order to be reviewing stormwater for these large homes. They only regulate trees around the perimeter of the lot. So they use the large house review to get at looking at trees within the site. Then they look at this typical things I think the special permit process does, circulation, lighting, design. And they set, the interesting part I think is that they set a static number for the size of home threshold that triggers large house review in each zoning district. So it would be, for us, it would be like the SR1 district, allows a, say, 3,500 square foot home before triggering large house review, regardless of lot size. So they don't have that ratio that's tying it to lot size like our FAR threshold is. Other than that, I think we are essentially doing this through the request for additional FAR. Because our ordinance currently caps FAR, but it allows it to be exceeded by special permit, in which case the council is looking at a lot of the same things that Wellesley is. So I think our takeaway here was that a new process is likely not necessary, but as part of this, it could be useful to think about the thresholds that trigger the special permit in new homes.
So, questions, comments from the committee? Councilor Wright?
So even houses built by right, if you go around the city and take a look at it, they seem to take up the whole lot. And, I'm shocked. Oh my gosh, that's really only 0.5 FAR. It looks like 0.75. So just leaving what we have as the FAR, I don't think is the right answer. What would be better, I think, is lowering the FAR, and then people can ask, and it would trigger the special permit, but I think that's a huge can of worms. I don't know if we really want to go down that. But I see more of that is lowering the FAR so it triggers special permit, and then there's some more review on it, because right now what's being built by right is still quite large. Thank you.
I guess I should add my comment too. I think the FAR increase is a special permit, but as Councilor Wright pointed out, the threshold size can be quite substantial and not trigger that review. So I think what Wellesley has done is say that a building of a certain scale is going to trigger large house review. I mean, large house review implies that it's a large house. I mean, whatever large is in our model. But whether we go to a special permit or there's something else, but it does seem to me that part of the challenge of looking at what has happened to the loss of the existing structures is, again, that a very large structure is taking its place by comparison. And maybe there is something that we should think about, and I don't know if this is a wise idea, but at least it's one that I think would be responsive, is that if the structure that is demolished is, say, 2,000 square feet, and the replacement structure is twice that size, maybe that triggers some sort of review independently. If it's maybe 1.5 times, maybe you don't. I don't know the answer to that, but part of what we were getting at in the conversation before the committee earlier is that we have smaller structures that are being replaced by larger ones, and the question is, can we look at what is lost as a way of evaluating what comes next? I don't know the answer to that, but I'd like to see you two and the department think about that question. It's sort of marbled in here a bit, but not explicitly. Councilor Guest.
The other thought that I'm having is that...
Again, can you make the
Yeah, okay. The thought that I'm having right now is that, the large house review is all of those factors that you were specifically talking about that I had mentioned previously is important in the sense of the abutters and the streetscape as well as, the area. And I know when there are zoning reviews, there is a map that looks at, the zoning of that specific area. I'm just wondering whether or not when a new house is proposed that is in the percentage larger than, say a defined range, 1,000 feet or, whatever, 2,000 feet, that it would trigger a review if in fact it was over a certain percent larger than, the surrounding properties. And whether or not that's feasible, and then go into an administrative review kind of process.
I think part of what I'm hearing, just to amplify that a little bit, is that at least in the Oak Hill context, where we've heard time again about smaller properties being torn down for much larger, whether the context is relevant. Again, I'm not sure that at some point the context changes because all the buildings are now bigger anyway, but the question, I think, is trying to look at context. I don't see any of these looking at context very much yet. And it may be possible to do that too. Okay, any other comments, questions? All right, option 4.
All right, so now I'm going to hand it off to Nora Masler to go through the additional options that were presented at the October meeting and our initial response. We're now sort of transitioning from just regulating the size of new homes to thinking about how we get at the issue of starter homes or more modest size homes. So, we think all of these options are important to think about in a package, that if you are limiting the size of new single family homes, you're also making it easier to build homes that are more attainable and less expensive.
Let me just comment at the outset. This is a different question than I think we started with, and which is to preserve the existing homes. The committee may want to entertain this, but I just want to be clear that it's not, as far as I'm concerned, within the scope of the original items. But carry on.
Thank you. Accessory dwelling units were raised by Councilors Wright and Oliver to create additional smaller and therefore less expensive homes. The proposal included considering an increased allowance for the size of ADUs if existing structures were less than a certain threshold for floor area ratio, a certain percentage of the original structure, particularly the front facade, remained intact, and all the structures on the lot conform to dimensional controls such as setbacks and open space. This suggestion is well timed, given that the planning staff are currently working on updating the ADU ordinance to address recent state law changes, though the law does not require Newton to increase the ADU size. Doing so in certain circumstances could be a way to increase housing diversity and options for Newton residents at different stages of life. Currently, internal ADUs may be up to 1,000 square feet, and external ADUs may be up to 900 square feet by right in Newton. Despite these allowances, only 0.6 of the eligible single and two-family homes in the city have created ADUs, and on average, 10 per year have been constructed across the city over the past 10 years. This points to the need for further research to understand what additional allowances may be necessary to increase utilization of the ADU ordinance, and what other barriers may deter homeowners from constructing or adding ADUs to their property. I'll pause there.
Comments? Councilor Wright?
Thank you. So my main reason for proposing this bigger ADUs is to provide a carrot to keep the existing structure. So if you do a tear down, you wouldn't get these larger ADUs. So that's more what a lot of this is we're trying to keep, to preserve a lot of the housing stock. And yes, some houses need to be torn down, but this is trying to preserve the housing stock and preserving the streetscape. And doing that, I'm trying to give another carrot for people to do it by allowing bigger ADUs. Thank you.
Councilor Oliver?
Great, thank you, Chair. Yeah, exactly. I think one of the important elements here that I really think is important to keep in focus is these concepts were all under the guise of preventing teardowns. We don't want to see these incentives or these concepts being lost in the shuffle when the mandate that we're trying to get at here, the focal point is to preserve the buildings that are there today by providing alternative incentives to keep that structure by, in this case, adding an ADU that might be larger, and I think we use the 1,200 square foot target again as something that's significantly larger, but not 2,000 square feet. But the whole idea here, and I think it's important to continuously remind ourselves that this would only be possible were the original structure to be kept. And I think that's a very important facet of this thought, this recommendation, this concept. Anyway,
Councilor
just
Kalish.
want to make sure that's important.
It's clear to me, but I think this idea has marginal to no benefit. I just feel like if you're a developer and you have the option to put on an ADU, or if you're even a homeowner with the option to put on an ADU, I just don't see it happening, versus a tear down. I think the other concepts to me are more compelling.
And if I may, Chair,
Yes.
just a quick response. You could be right. You could be 1,000% right. But if we consider the work that we have to do in allowing these to be, we're going to have to allow these, if I understand it correctly. It's no longer owner occupied. That's no longer a requirement for these. So maybe that combined with the size of said unit, I don't know, but it was a thought we wanted to put out there because the original intent of an ADU was, perhaps different, but it's a construct that's out there that some small, very incredibly, perhaps small percentage of our residents have taken advantage of. But ultimately, I think we all believe this to be a very good idea. And we just haven't figured out the sweet spot yet. But again, I acknowledge, you could be right.
Councilor Albright?
So from people that I've talked to, the biggest obstacle to ADUs is the second means of egress and the expense of adding another stairway, either external or internal, and finding another way for folks to get in and out of the second unit. And I mean, some people see that ADUs are a panacea, and I'm glad that the legislature did whatever they did to make them easier to do, but I don't see the ADU as the way into the future to get a lot more housing because of the expense. It's really the expense of this second means of egress. It's a great idea in concept until you add the expense to it. But my real question is, by when do we have to amend our city ordinance? Do we have a deadline for that?
Yes, so the state law changes will go into effect February 2nd. So ideally, we'll amend our ordinance prior to that, but either way, the changes go into effect on that date. But we do plan to bring, I think at the next meeting, bring forward a draft of changes.
Okay.
Let me just say that I share skepticism about this as a general solution, and I personally want to see the owner occupancy requirement preserved for as many places and contexts as we can. I think it's been one of the signal benefits of having our ordinance. So this is not a place I would spend a lot of time. We're going to have to deal with the ordinance itself, but I wouldn't look at this as the remedy for the teardowns, which is, I agree with Councilor Oliver, is where we started from. It's not a general matter to change. Councilor Wright.
So I believe we have to remove the owner occupy.
We do for the as of right size. The question I don't know the answer to is whether we can retain it for the bigger projects, because part of the value of the owner occupancy, I think we're trying to avoid sort of the syndicate housing problems that you've seen in other places in the country, and so that's.
And doing an ADU in the house is more of a challenge, but an ADU can be a separate building, a smaller separate building. And you're seeing a lot of that out in California. And again, it's adding to our housing stock. It's a smaller house, things like that. So you have more of a variety instead of all McMansions. So again, I like it because it's just another option to bring things in. And of course, not one of these is going to solve our problem, but here's another incentive to keep the house instead of tearing it down. And I think an owner won't tear down their own home. They might do the renovation, but this gives them, the option to add something else onto their lot. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Albright, sorry.
Can I just, a question? So, some of this is part of what we thought about originally when we first started doing the ADU ordinance back in the day. And so if you wanted to do, under this model, if you wanted to do make your garage into an ADU, and you had the ability to make it larger than it is up to a certain amount, which I think is a great idea, but the pushback from people was, but you're going to turn all of our SR1s into two-family lots. So just be aware that that's what people are going to say about this solution, because that's what we heard a lot back in the day.
Well, this new ruling from the state has already done it, has gotten rid of single-family housing, with the second unit being much smaller. So it's already been, when it takes effect, it's already gone.
Well, we already have it as a right in the city anyway. The state law doesn't do a whole lot except for the residential requirement.
But making it larger makes it more appealing to do that.
Okay. Well, we want to get through the list here tonight, so carry on. Let's go on to the next.
Thank you, Chair. Councilors Oliver and Wright also presented on adaptive reuse on October 10th as a path for larger homes to be preserved by converting them into multifamily by right. More specifically, they presented allowing a modest addition off the back or the side of a home in conjunction with allowing up to 4 units. I understand these were starting points, not firm numbers. Building off MRT as parameters as a model. Currently, MRT, which is part of the VCOD, allows for larger footprints and up to 6 units by right when at least the front portion of the existing home is retained. However, since this zoning was adopted last December, only one adaptive reuse project has been permitted to add 1 unit onto an existing 3-family home. For these reasons, further research is needed to understand the size and unit allowance that create a feasible and desirable path for reuse, and more analysis is needed to understand which areas of the city or housing typologies are most suited for adaptive reuse.
Okay, any comments or questions? I'll just say I'm cautious about this too because I'm not sure these represent the tear down opportunities. We've got a fair amount of these, as you so pointed out, in the village VCOD district. So I'm not sure I would want to spend any time pursuing this outside that area.
Could I ask a question regarding that? Because the idea here is that you are preserving the existing house. So the idea here is that you are preserving the existing house.
But are these the demolition candidates? That's what I'm concerned about. I'm not sure. What we're seeing in the earlier analysis, I thought, were smaller homes on large lots.
Correct.
Not larger homes on smaller lots. And part of what I'm concerned about is that we're changing the situation. We're responding to something that wasn't initially a concern. And that we have this option in the VCOD. So I'm personally not interested in pursuing this in other parts of the city at this point. But let's go on to option 6.
Well, I have a question or
Sure.
a comment.
Yeah.
So I feel we should keep it because, yes, we want the smaller homes, but this is also preserving the current stock. Because take a look at, I'm trying to think, maybe Oak Hill or other places. You know, the houses there are pretty large to begin with, and they're tearing them down and making much larger. So I like to have any incentive to keep the streetscape, the original house, and in order to have the incentive is to have a couple of units and add on in the back instead of tearing it down. And generally the bigger houses are the beautiful old Victorians and things like that. So again, I think, you know, keeping part of the fabric of our city intact, that's something I'd like to do. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go on.
Sir.
No, Councilor Kalis.
Yeah, I have to side with, what's your name? Councilor, it says Laredo. Mr. Chair. Because I don't see these large houses being at risk. The ones in Oka Park, all those that get torn down are the smaller ones, and the larger ones get built. So it's been happening year over year over year. I just want us to focus on the existing small houses and not kind of be sidetracked by other noise, because if we are, we're not going to be able to get anything done. So I tend to agree that this should not be considered.
Okay, thank you. We'll carry on. Next item. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Just to give an example, if you go down Walnut Street between here and Newtonville, there's a Victorian house that was torn down, a lovely Victorian house torn down, and a large, honking large house is going up. So we have that problem too, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Option 6.
The idea of contextual subdivision was not presented by Councilors Wright and Oliver, but planning staff would like to present this idea as an additional tool to help achieve the goals of preserving existing homes, reducing home sizes, and creating more housing options. For example, there are a number of lots like the one shown on the screen throughout the city that are roughly twice the size of surrounding lots. To preserve the existing home and create a new, smaller, less expensive home, these lots could be divided. An additional unit could be built adjacent to the existing home of a similar size to the rest of the homes on the street. However, that is not allowed under today's zoning, as we're all well aware. What brings us here today is the regulatory environment that limits potential for infill development that maintains an existing structure with redevelopment resulting in much larger new homes compared with others on the street. Pause there.
Comments from the committee? Councilor Wright.
I have a question. In general, I think, and I don't have any data, just my gut feel, is if you have that big lot, the house is on the center of the lot, not to one side. Sometimes it is, but usually it's on the center, so it will be torn down and make two. I mean, I do like seeing this here, I do like that, but I don't know in reality if it's really keeping the original house.
Councilor Kalis?
Love this idea.
I don't, but never mind. Let's carry on.
So just the next steps, we look forward to hearing any additional discussion on any ideas presented. We will return in December with UTIL to present additional analysis, including test fits to support draft zoning recommendations. This analysis will inform the basis to identifying Newton's regulations that may be adjusted to address council and community concerns. And we'll begin to conduct community outreach, potentially including creating a website, conducting a survey, and/or hosting an open house.
So let me just say that I don't want you to get ahead of us here. I think that the committee needs to make the decision about whether we go out with something before we get to open houses and websites. I think that part of the genesis of this and why we've been spending so much time on it is literally the whole year to try and get at the problem of the tear down. And what this is morphing into, in my judgment, is an attempt to try and change the composition of the housing stock in the city, which is an appropriate potential goal, but not what we started with. So I want to see the committee's, the department respond to the real question that we started with, which is what do we do with the problem of having what are not affordable, but at least less expensive structures in the city torn down to make way for much more expensive existing housing. And so I think the department has gone beyond what I think the mandate of the conversation has been, and I'd like to see it succeed on what we've got. Councilor Kalis?
I mean, I hear what you're saying. I feel like they had some suggestions, the first three especially. Do you want us to vote on the 6? Do you want them to pursue the first three? If you agree with me, I don't know.
Vote. I think the first three, at least the dimensionals, have some potential. I didn't hear. I mean, we're going to look at the ADUs anyway, and I think the others are sort of a reach from where we started. So I would like us to see us do something on the first category and get that underway. Mr. Oliver, Councilor Oliver.
Thank you. I'm actually just channeling my best version of Councilor Baker here for a second. Of the 6, regardless of any other factor, that last concept there, that last idea, has it. Regardless of its merit, it has nothing to do with enhancing preservation of existing homes. So I don't think it fits under these items as written. And if there's someone from the legal department who's still here, I don't know if we can actually keep that under these 3 items.
Well, these are discussion. Yeah, I think that's a reasonable question, but I think they're discussion items and they're nothing.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But I think I want to see the department expend its energy on the question of the tear down issue and the replacement of the tear downs. That's what we started with, and I want to see our committee bring something to the council if we can on that problem. There are certainly other things committee could do, but that's not where we started and what these items are for. Mr. Planning Director.
Yeah, so I disagree. I think that the premise for all of these was preservation of existing homes. At least I heard a lot of good feedback from counselors tonight on each and every one of these in terms of exploring it a little bit further. There was hardly a one where everybody said that was not a good idea. A lot of these suggestions came from the council itself that we kind of expanded upon. We're certainly open to more exploration on which ideas have merit, and are willing to come back at the next meeting to explore them further. And at that point, I think the council can indicate which ones they want to proceed further with. But I think these are all ideas that have come from the same place, which is how do we incentivize the preservation of existing properties for Newton homeowners. We didn't really touch too much on the economic piece, which we've touched on in the past, which I think is a very real aspect of this, which is if you're going to incentivize a homeowner to hold on to their property, you need to give them some economic options that can compete with a developer.
Well, Mr. Heath, I beg to differ with you. We've talked about at the beginning that this is 100 homes a year that are torn down. What we've got are solutions that speak to the entire city's development pattern, and I'm not sure that's where we wanted to start. We may end up there at some future point, but I want to see, just speaking for myself, I want to see a response to that particular problem that we've heard from citizens time and again. They didn't hear from them saying they want to have more development in the city. They heard they want to see less development, and I want to see some response to that. Mr. Utile has certainly brought us through the whole process of doing the VCOD, and that's an opportunity for development that's quite substantial. But I'd like to see us respond to the teardowns. That's my view. Councilor Albright.
So I understand your hesitation. However, I think some of the ideas that grew out of the memo from Councilors Wright and Oliver, they may have merit. It feels like we should pursue them, have a closer look at them, and we don't have to take any one of them as we move along. But it feels like it would be silly to close avenues if in their study they feel like these are options that might help us to incentivize keeping a house as opposed to tearing it down. I wouldn't want to close off the ability for us to think about it a little further.
I think we have that opportunity. I'm just trying to give some signal. Councilor Kalis?
You know, the one where we kind of said, or a few people said, it's not relevant, the last one they presented. I mean, if you have a small house, and I know of a relatively small house on a large lot, and I've said to the owners, you could put another house there. And they're like, well, we're not allowed to. I think that does fit into what we're looking at. And I think that should be looked at.
Okay. I wasn't part of the original, but, well, I don't think at this hour we're going to get to a conclusion, but I think, Mr. Heath, you've heard comments from a number of us, and I think the point of this is that we want to get something that we can propose to the council that's going to be successful. So I think we want to keep that in mind. It's not just a matter of exploring things. We want to get something that we can point to and say, we've spent our time over this last year and we've got something to show for it. Because if that's not the case, I feel that we've really not seized the opportunity, and we don't have much time because the budget starts in March, or I mean in April, and that's our window to get something done that may be beneficial. So we can talk about this at our planning conversation next time. All right. Any further comments from anyone?
One comment. Ms. Kyra,
Okay.
the one I'm talking about is on Jackson Road, and it's going to be going for sale soon, so we should watch it.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, now, did the planning staff want to say anything further, Mr. Carey? You had, okay.
Motion to
I wanna
hold.
come. Okay, motion to hold on both items. All those in favor will say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you very much, and we will, we appreciate your, I'm sorry, it's 10:20, but I think it's been an interesting evening. Motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn.
moved.
All right, all in favor? Aye. We're done.